The illusion of choice. Let them decide what you already decided. We all like to feel in control, to feel like we're choosing, not being pushed. But what if I told you the best way to influence someone is to offer them a choice that leads exactly where you want? It's called the illusion of choice. Here's a classic example. A parent says to their child, "Do you want to do your homework now or after dinner?" To the child, this feels empowering. They're choosing, but beneath the surface, the choice is structured. Homework is happening either way. It's not manipulation, it's framing. The parent isn't forcing, they're guiding, and that small shift often prevents resistance. Because when people feel like they chose, they don't fight the outcome. They own it. This technique isn't limited to parenting. It shows up in leadership, teaching, sales, even relationships. Imagine you're leading a team at work. Instead of saying, "We're going to implement this strategy," you say, "Would you rather start with the new rollout this week or after the weekend?" Both options move the plan forward. But the team feels involved, respected, included. And because they participated in the decision, they're more likely to follow through with energy, not resistance. The brain resists force, but it accepts guidance. It reacts against being told what to do, but relaxes when it feels it has a say. That's the power of the illusion of choice. You reduce friction not by removing structure, but by hiding it inside freedom. Now, this only works when the options are genuine. No one likes fake choices or rigged outcomes. But when you frame options that all move toward your shared goal and let the other person decide the path, you give them dignity. You're saying, "I trust you to choose. I just built the map." And when people feel trusted, they usually rise to meet it. So next time you're trying to gain agreement, don't ask for obedience. Offer a choice. One that you've already shaped, carefully, respectfully, so that wherever they go, you both end up in the right place. The power of the pause. There's a secret that great speakers, powerful negotiators, and charismatic leaders all use, but most people never notice it. They pause. They pause right before they say something important. They pause after they've asked a question. They pause instead of rushing to fill the silence. And that pause, it changes everything. We tend to think that talking more shows confidence. That silence is awkward, that if we're not filling the space, we're losing people. But the opposite is often true. When you speak quickly with no breaks, no breath, no silence, it can sound nervous, rushed, insecure. It gives your listener no space to process, no time to think. But when you pause, deliberately, calmly, people lean in. They pay attention. You seem more thoughtful, more intelligent, more in control. It's not about dragging your words out. It's about knowing when not to speak. That's the trick. Think about it like music. If a song had no rests, just one endless stream of notes, it wouldn't move you, it wouldn't breathe. The pauses are what give rhythm, emotion, meaning. Human speech works the same way. The silence between your words highlights the words themselves. When you pause before saying something, it builds anticipation. When you pause after saying something, it lets the idea land. It's like putting bold and underline on your voice without saying a single extra word. There's a famous technique used by top trial lawyers. After asking a key question, they stay completely silent. Why? Because silence makes people uncomfortable. And when a witness or jury hears that silence, they often rush to fill it. They say more. They reveal more. They expose what they might have hidden if the lawyer had just kept talking. That same dynamic happens in everyday life. When you're negotiating, interviewing, teaching, even arguing, use the pause. Ask your question. Then wait. Say your point. Then stop. Let it breathe. It might feel awkward at first. That's normal. Most people are scared of silence because they think it makes them look weak or unprepared. But once you learn to sit with it, to control it, you'll find something magical. You'll seem more powerful, more credible, more respected. People will begin to listen differently, not because you said more, but because you gave your words room to echo. Mirror and match. Imagine you're talking to someone new. You've just met, maybe at a cafe, maybe at work, and the conversation is flowing surprisingly well. You're laughing at the same time, leaning forward when they lean forward, sipping your drink without even noticing they sipped theirs a second before. It feels like you click. But what's actually happening isn't magic, it's psychology. And it's called mirroring. Mirroring is the subtle act of reflecting someone's body language, speech patterns, or even energy level, without copying them, obviously. It happens naturally between close friends and couples. But you can also use it consciously to build rapport, create trust, and strengthen connection, even with strangers. It works because we're wired to like people who are like us. Not necessarily people who agree with us, but people who move like us, talk like us, carry the same rhythm. It sends a subconscious message. You and I? We're on the same wavelength. In one famous study, waiters who mirrored their customers by subtly repeating their words or gestures earned significantly higher tips than those who didn't. Another experiment showed that job candidates who lightly mirrored their interviewers were rated as more competent, warm, and trustworthy. Because mirroring bypasses logic, it speaks directly to the emotional brain, the part that decides whether we like someone or not, often in the first 30 seconds. But this only works when it's subtle. If you obviously copy everything someone does, they'll notice. It feels weird, like mockery. And the trust disappears instantly. So don't overdo it. Instead, do this. Match their posture. Are they relaxed or upright? Match their energy. Are they fast-talking or slow-paced? Match their language. Do they use casual words or more formal phrases? You're not becoming them. You're meeting them where they are. Then gently guiding the rhythm of the interaction. This works not just in conversations, but in sales, therapy, negotiation, dating, even parenting. Say you're having a difficult talk with someone who's upset. They're speaking quickly, pacing, clearly anxious. If you stay still and speak slowly, it creates a mismatch. They might feel like you're not listening or don't understand their urgency. But if you first match their intensity, then gradually slow yourself down, they'll often begin to mirror you in return. That's the power of leading through rhythm. The Benjamin Franklin Effect. It's one of those counterintuitive truths. If you want someone to like you, don't do them a favor. Ask them to do one for you. It sounds backwards, almost manipulative, but it's a real phenomenon, and it goes back centuries. Benjamin Franklin, inventor, philosopher, statesman, once had a bitter political rival, a man who opposed him at every turn and made no secret of it. Franklin didn't flatter him. He didn't bribe him. He didn't try to argue him into liking him. Instead, he wrote the man a short letter. In it, Franklin politely asked if he could borrow a rare and valuable book from the man's library. He'd heard it was excellent and knew this man owned a copy. The rival agreed. He sent the book. Franklin read it, returned it with a handwritten thank you note, and said nothing more. From that moment on, something shifted. The rival, who had been openly cold, became warm, cooperative. Eventually, they became friends. Franklin later wrote that he'd discovered a secret. People are more likely to like you after they've done something for you, not before. Psychologists gave this odd effect a name, the Benjamin Franklin Effect. It works because our minds don't like contradictions. If I help someone, even in a small way, my brain wants that behavior to make sense. So I subconsciously adjust my beliefs to match. Well, I just helped them, so I must like them. This is a kind of retroactive emotional logic. Instead of I like you, so I help you, it becomes I helped you, so I must like you. And this reframing happens under the surface, quietly, automatically. Think about how many situations this could shift. A new colleague you want to connect with. A distant friend you'd like to warm up, even a teacher, a mentor, someone you admire. Instead of performing for them or bending over backwards to impress, what if you asked them for a small favor? Not a huge ask. Something specific. Respectful. Genuine. Like borrowing a book, asking for insight, requesting advice on something they care about. It seems small. But it opens a loop in their mind. They've helped you now. That means something about you must be worth helping. And once that idea takes root, liking often follows. There's something beautifully human in this, that closeness doesn't always come from giving. Sometimes it comes from allowing someone to give. Trust begins when we show that we trust, and often that begins with just one quiet request. Foot in the door technique. Imagine someone knocks on your door and says, "Would you mind answering just one question about recycling?" You say, "Sure, it's quick, harmless." A week later, they return. This time they ask, "Would you be willing to put a large 'Please recycle' sign in your front yard?" Most people would say no. Too public. Too much. But here's the twist. If you agreed to the first tiny request, just that one question, you're dramatically more likely to agree to the second, larger one. That's the foot in the door technique. Psychologists tested this in the 1960s. The results were clear. When people commit to something small, they become more open to something big, especially if the two things feel aligned. Why? Because we want to see ourselves as consistent. If I said yes before, then saying yes again keeps my story straight. It's not about logic. It's about identity. I'm the kind of person who supports this. I've already started, may as well keep going. That small first step becomes the psychological doorway to bigger action. Salespeople use this all the time. They don't start by asking you to buy. They start by asking you to try. A free sample, a quick demo, a tiny commitment. Once you've said yes to that, the real pitch feels less abrupt, even familiar. But this isn't just a persuasion trick. It's something you already use without noticing. Parents ask kids to clean just one thing. Teachers ask for just one sentence. Partners ask, "Can we just talk for a minute?" Because once we start, we tend to keep going. The key is that first ask. It has to feel harmless, effortless, aligned with what the person already believes. Then later, when the bigger ask comes, it no longer feels like pressure. It feels like progress, and people are far more willing to say yes to something that feels like a continuation, not a confrontation. We often think influence means making the perfect pitch, but the truth is, the pitch already began with the first tiny yes. And the next one is often just a natural step forward. Door in the face technique. Now let's flip the script. Imagine asking your boss for a 30% raise. They blink, laugh awkwardly, and say, "That's not possible." A moment later, you follow up. "Okay, fair. How about 10%? Suddenly, 10% feels reasonable. You didn't change the request. You changed the context. That's the door in the face technique, the psychological twin of foot in the door, but in reverse. Here's how it works. You start with a request that's deliberately large, even a little outrageous. The other person says no. Then you ask for something smaller, what you actually wanted all along. That second request feels like a compromise. They feel like they're meeting you halfway, even though you've already met them there. Researchers tested this with volunteers on college campuses. In one version, students were asked, "Will you volunteer to chaperone a group of troubled kids to the zoo?" Only a small percentage said yes. But in the second version, students were first asked, "Would you be willing to volunteer every week for the next 2 years helping at-risk youth?" Everyone said no, of course. Then came the follow-up. "Okay, would you be willing to chaperone just one trip to the zoo?" This time, the number of people who agreed tripled. They still said yes to the same thing, but it felt like less. Like they were getting off easy. This technique works because of a powerful principle, reciprocal concession. When someone backs off from a big ask, we feel socially inclined to meet them partway, to give something in return. It's not about tricking people. It's about framing, showing that your request is flexible, reasonable, moderate, in comparison to what it could have been. In practice, you see this everywhere. In job negotiations, ask high, then settle. In parenting, offer two options, both better than the original problem. In everyday conversation, set the bar, then shift to what you really need. Used with care, it makes the final request feel fair, palatable, even generous. The trick isn't just in the ask, it's in how you adjust. Because sometimes the best way to get a yes is by giving someone the chance to say no first. Nodding while talking. There's a subtle trick you've probably seen before, and maybe even done without realizing. You're in a conversation, making a point, and as you speak, you start to nod gently, and the other person starts nodding too. They agree, not just with their head, but with their mind. Why? Because nonverbal cues aren't just signals, they're contagious. This effect is called nonverbal mirroring, and it's surprisingly powerful. When you nod while speaking, you send a signal. This is agreeable. This makes sense. You can trust this. And because humans are wired for social harmony, the person you're talking to often mirrors that movement, and more interestingly, mirrors the attitude behind it. It's not hypnosis. It's biology. Our brains are filled with mirror neurons, cells that help us reflect the emotions and behaviors of others. They're why we flinch when someone gets hurt, why laughter spreads, why yawns are contagious, and yes, they're part of why agreement spreads too. In one study, researchers found that waiters and waitresses who nodded subtly while reciting specials got higher tips and more positive ratings. In another, speakers who nodded while presenting were rated as more trustworthy and persuasive, even when their content stayed the same. It's not just what you say, it's how your body co-signs it. But here's the nuance. It has to be subtle. Overdo it, and you look unsure. Or even manipulative. But a calm, slow nod, timed to your key points, creates a rhythm the listener falls into, a shared tempo, a shared agreement. The same works in reverse. If someone's unsure or resistant, you can watch their nods as a barometer. If they're shaking their head slightly, it's not time to push. If they're nodding along, even slowly, you're in sync. That feedback loop becomes your guide. And once you learn to feel that rhythm, to move just a little when it matters, you'll notice something subtle shift in how people respond. Because sometimes the smallest movement moves everything. Speak slowly. Be heard. We often rush our words when we're nervous, talk too fast when we want to sound smart, fill silence like it's a sinkhole. But here's the strange truth. The slower you speak, the more seriously people take you. It's not just about clarity, it's about perception. When you speak quickly, people assume you're uncertain, like you're racing to get your point out before someone cuts you off. It can sound insecure, even if what you're saying is completely correct, but slow things down, just a little, and the effect changes. Suddenly, you sound thoughtful, measured, someone worth listening to. There's a reason great speakers pause between sentences. A reason powerful leaders speak with rhythm, not speed. It's not because they don't know what to say. It's because they know the value of space. Every pause adds weight. Every slower sentence gives the listener time to absorb, to reflect, to believe. Think of Morgan Freeman, or Barack Obama, or any voice you've heard in a documentary that made you stop what you were doing. They aren't fast talkers, they're deliberate ones. Because when you slow down, you signal confidence, that you don't need to rush, that your words carry enough gravity to stand on their own. This doesn't mean dragging every sentence out. It's not about being dramatic or robotic. It's about breathing. Letting silence do half the talking. And the next time you feel that urge to speak faster, to sound smarter, try the opposite. Slow your voice by just a beat. Let the words land like stones, not marbles. You might be surprised how much louder they sound. Ask for advice, not opinions. There's a subtle difference between two questions. What's your opinion on this versus what would you do in my position? They seem similar. But the second one, it changes the entire conversation. Because when you ask someone for their opinion, it invites judgment. It creates distance. It puts them in the role of a critic, but when you ask for advice, you do something deeper. You signal trust. You imply respect. You're saying, I believe you have something valuable I can learn from, and that simple shift triggers something powerful. Studies show that when you ask someone for advice, even if you're unsure whether they'll give it, they often end up thinking more highly of you afterward. It's called the advice paradox. People believe giving advice puts them in a position of power, but it also deepens their empathy for the person who asked. They don't just evaluate you, they start imagining themselves as you, and that makes them more understanding, more thoughtful, more generous. In a workplace setting, this trick works wonders. Say you're unsure how to handle a tricky situation with a client. You could say, what do you think about how I handled that call? Or you could say, if you were me, how would you approach that next time? The second version pulls the listener into your world. It invites them to imagine, not judge, and that makes their answer more collaborative and their impression of you stronger. This works in relationships too. Asking your partner for advice on a personal decision signals trust, even vulnerability. And that can draw them closer. Even if you don't take the advice word for word, it tells them, I value your mind. I don't just want feedback. I want your perspective. And most people love being seen that way. So when you're unsure, don't just ask what people think. Ask what they'd do. And let them step into your shoes, if only for a moment. That moment might change how they see you forever. Use their name. We hear thousands of words a day. Most drift past us like wind. But there's one word that always cuts through the noise. Our own name. It doesn't matter how distracted you are. When someone says your name, your brain lights up, even in a crowded room. Even when whispered, it's more than just identification, it's recognition. The psychologist Dale Carnegie once wrote, a person's name is to that person the sweetest sound in any language. It's not flattery. It's not manipulation. It's affirmation. When someone uses your name in conversation, not excessively, but at the right moment, it sends a signal. You're not just a face. You matter. Think about the difference. That's a good point. That's a good point. Echo. The first feels nice. The second feels personal. Seen. It's a gentle spark of human attention, one that often goes missing in everyday life. In one study, servers who repeated customers' names when taking their orders received significantly higher tips than those who didn't. Not because the food was better, but because the interaction felt warmer, more real. In another, doctors who greeted patients by name before explaining treatments were rated as more trustworthy and competent, even when their advice was identical. Names open doors in the mind. They quiet the instinct to be guarded. They remind us we're not just roles, we're people, but it's not about overuse. Say someone's name too often, and it sounds fake, robotic, like a sales pitch. But drop it in gently, at the start of a sentence, or just once in a conversation, and it lands. It works even more powerfully when paired with eye contact, a soft voice, genuine attention. Because it's not the name itself, it's the feeling behind it. The moment when someone says, I see you in all of this, so whether you're meeting someone for the first time or trying to deepen a relationship you've had for years, don't underestimate the smallest gesture. A name, said softly, with care, can echo longer than a paragraph. Compliment behind their back. Most compliments vanish as soon as they're spoken. They land, they please, they fade. But there's one kind of compliment that lingers longer, hits deeper, and often matters more. the one they weren't meant to hear. Imagine this. You're walking past a doorway and you catch a fragment of conversation. Someone you know is talking about you, but not to you. And what they're saying is kind, praising your work ethic, admiring your patience, saying something you'd never expect to hear directly. That moment sticks with you, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt honest. When someone compliments us to our face, we sometimes question the motive. Are they being polite, trying to win favor, just saying what they're supposed to? But when a compliment comes without an audience, when it's said behind our back and finds its way to us later, we believe it. Because it wasn't performance, it was character. Psychologists call this the third-party compliment effect, and it's deeply rooted in how we form trust. When we hear someone say something positive about us when they didn't have to, it feels more real. It feels earned, private, true. And that can reshape how we see ourselves and how we see them. This dynamic also works in reverse. If you speak well of someone when they're not around, the words have a strange way of returning. A mutual friend passes it along. A comment circles back. An echo finds its source. And when it does, it says something much louder than flattery ever could. It says, "This person respects you, even when you're not watching." In a world filled with noise and performance, that kind of quiet praise carries weight. It builds reputations, it builds trust, and trust, once formed that way, doesn't fade quickly. So the next time you want to make someone feel genuinely valued, don't just wait for the moment when they're in front of you. Say the good thing when they're not. Let it travel, let it find its way back. Because sometimes, the words we don't say to someone directly are the ones they remember most. Avoid the word why. You're trying to understand someone. You ask with good intentions, "Why did you do that?" And suddenly their body tightens. Their tone shifts. The conversation stalls. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't accuse. But the moment the word why left your mouth, something changed. Because why often feels like blame, even when it isn't meant that way. In psychology, this is known as defensive attribution. When people feel questioned about their motives, they instinctively protect their image, not just in your eyes, but in their own. Why is a spotlight word. It implies there must be a deeper reason, and that reason better be justifiable. Why are you late? Why did you choose that option? Why didn't you tell me earlier? Even if asked softly, it nudges the other person into explaining themselves, which often sounds and feels like defending themselves. Now contrast it with other questions. Instead of, "Why did you do that?" try what was going through your mind at the time. Instead of, "Why are you upset?" try what part of this feels most frustrating. The change is small, but the emotional shift is enormous. You're moving from interrogation to invitation, from judgment to curiosity. This principle applies to parenting, relationships, coaching, even conflict resolution. "Why didn't you tell me?" becomes what made it hard to bring up. "Why are you being so sensitive?" becomes what are you feeling right now. These aren't softened versions. They're better tools because they lead to real answers, not reactive ones. And interestingly, this works inward too, even with yourself. Instead of "Why am I always like this?" try "What patterns am I repeating?" or "What part of me needed that reaction?" Self-interrogation often sounds like shame, but self-inquiry creates space, and in that space, insight can live. The most important questions aren't always the hardest. They're the ones people can actually answer, openly, without fear. So if you're after understanding, not just explanations, trade your why for a what or a how. It won't make your questions weaker. It'll make your connection stronger. And that's usually where the truth starts to emerge. Don't correct, redirect. How to win without making enemies. You hear someone say something wrong. Maybe they've misquoted a fact, misunderstood a concept, made a flawed argument. Your instinct? correct them, fix it, set the record straight. But here's the catch. Correction feels like confrontation. And when people feel corrected, especially in front of others, they don't rethink their position. They defend it. They tighten. They push back. They stop listening. There's a better way, one that doesn't bruise egos or start arguments. It's called redirection. Instead of telling someone they're wrong, you shift the conversation toward a better version without ever labeling their idea as a mistake. You don't say, "Actually, that's not true." You say, "That's an interesting take." Another way I've heard it explained is, or that reminds me of something similar. Have you ever thought about it this way? It's not about being vague. It's about being invitational instead of adversarial. The goal isn't to beat them in a debate. It's to keep the conversation open. And open conversations, even ones that start in disagreement, can actually shift minds. But not if they shut down first. You'll see this technique used by skilled therapists, negotiators, even comedians. They rarely go head-to-head. They go sideways. They pivot, reframe, suggest, and the audience follows, not because they were forced, but because they weren't embarrassed. We're social creatures. Pride matters more than logic in most conversations, and public correction, it often wounds pride more than it helps truth. But redirection lets people save face while still moving forward. It plants new ideas without tearing down old ones. And when people feel respected, not corrected, they're far more likely to consider changing their view. So next time you hear something wrong, pause. Instead of proving a point, open a path. Because changing someone's mind often starts by showing them a way out of their old one without slamming the door behind them. Highlight the cost of inaction. You're trying to convince someone to act, to make a change, to take a risk, to say yes. You give them the facts. You show them the benefits. You paint the upside clearly, logically, hopefully, and still, they hesitate. Why? Because in most cases, the promise of gain isn't what moves people. The fear of loss is. This is a well-documented psychological principle known as loss aversion. People are far more motivated to avoid losing something they already have than they are to gain something they've never had. It's not rational. It's emotional. A $50 loss feels worse than a $50 gain. Feels good. And this imbalance shapes countless decisions every day, quietly, invisibly. Think about marketing. A product that says you could save $100 by switching might feel interesting. But a product that says you're losing $100 every month you wait hits harder, faster. Because now it's not about a possible future. It's about a current leak, something slipping away. We do this in relationships too, without realizing. Telling someone, "I want more connection with you," can fall flat. But saying, "I'm starting to feel a distance growing between us, and I don't want to lose this," lands differently. It feels urgent, emotional, real. Because it frames the cost, not in abstract desires, but in what's already at risk. This doesn't mean using fear as a weapon. It means recognizing that urgency comes from clarity. People need to understand not just what they could gain, but what they're already missing by staying still. So when you need someone to move, to change, to act, to decide, don't just show them the finish line. Show them the ground they're losing by standing still. Because in the end, it's not always the dream that drives us. It's the fear of waking up and realizing we missed it. Label their emotion. You're in a tense conversation. Someone's upset, maybe angry, maybe anxious, maybe they don't even know what they're feeling. Their words are sharp, their energy rising. Logic isn't working. Reassurance falls flat. In that moment, what do you do? Here's what most people try. Calm down. It's not that bad. Just relax. But if you've ever said that to someone who's spiraling, you already know it rarely helps. That's because when someone's emotions are flooding, they don't need instruction, they need recognition. And one of the most powerful tools in psychology is also one of the simplest: name what they're feeling. It's called affect labeling, and it works like this. You take a guess, a soft, non-judgmental observation, and put their emotion into words. You seem really frustrated right now. That sounds like it's making you anxious. It feels like you're overwhelmed. You're not analyzing. You're not fixing. You're simply giving a shape to the storm, and that alone often calms it. Here's why. When emotions rise, the brain shifts into limbic mode, that primal reactive state built for survival. It's powerful, but it's not very rational. But when you label the feeling, even roughly, it engages a different system, the prefrontal cortex. The part of the brain responsible for language, reasoning, self-awareness. In other words, putting feelings into words helps bring the thinking brain back online. In one study, participants were shown angry or fearful faces. Their amygdala, the emotion center, lit up as expected. But when they were asked to label the emotion on the face, angry, afraid, activity in the amygdala dropped and the prefrontal cortex lit up instead. They didn't just feel less, they processed more. This works in everyday life too. When someone's venting and you say, "It sounds like that left you feeling disrespected," something often shifts. Not because you solved anything, but because you saw it. You named it. And that gave the other person a sense of grounding. A sense that their emotional reality isn't invisible, that they aren't just yelling into the void, and strangely, this works inward too. Naming your own emotion, even quietly, privately, can change your state. I'm not just annoyed, I'm feeling dismissed. I'm not just tired, I'm emotionally drained. I'm not angry, I'm afraid. Putting a word to it makes it feel smaller, more contained. Less like a fog, and more like a map. We think clarity comes from solving emotions, but often it starts by simply witnessing them, not with pressure, not with judgment, just with language. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to someone who's spiraling is not, "It's okay, but I hear that you're hurting." And that makes sense. And suddenly, they're not alone in it anymore, which might be the first step to making it through. Use because, even if it's obvious, there's a single word that can drastically increase your chances of getting what you want. Not a complicated technique, not a mind game, just one word. Because it sounds too simple, almost ridiculous. But study after study shows this tiny word triggers something deeply automatic in the human mind, a reflex to comply, even when the reason that follows it barely matters. The most famous study comes from Harvard in the 1970s. Researchers approached people waiting in line to use a photocopier and tested different ways of asking to cut the line. Version 1. "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine?" About 60% of people said yes. Version 2. "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I'm in a rush?" 94% said yes. But here's the strange part. Version 3. "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I have to make some copies?" That's a meaningless reason. Everyone in the line was there to make copies. But still, 93% said yes. Almost the same as when there was a valid excuse. Why does this work? Because the word "because" acts like a cognitive shortcut. It tells the brain, a reason is coming, this is justified. And once we hear a reason, any reason, we become more likely to say yes. It's not that the logic is strong, it's that the structure feels familiar. Request, reason, response. The rhythm makes it feel valid, even when it isn't. Now, this doesn't mean people are fools. If the stakes are high, they'll still evaluate the reason. But in everyday requests, asking for time, small favors, slight exceptions, the presence of "because" smooths resistance. And in a world full of friction, smoothness is power. This applies everywhere. At work, could we reschedule the meeting because I need more time to prep? In negotiation, I'd like a better rate because I've been a loyal customer. In casual requests, mind grabbing the door because my hands are full. Even if the reason is simple or obvious, naming it matters. People want to feel the ask has a reason, even if it's just a basic one. And here's the deeper layer. Using because doesn't just make the other person more likely to agree. It also makes you sound more thoughtful, more grounded, less random. It tells them, I'm not just demanding, I'm inviting you into my reasoning, and that alone can shift the emotional tone of any interaction. So next time you ask for something, big or small, don't just hope for yes. Give the mind something to hold on to. A bridge, a reason, even a soft one. Because as strange as it sounds, because might be all it takes. Show, don't tell confidence. You've probably met someone who tells you how confident they are. They walk into a room loudly, dominate conversations, take up space, and yet something feels off. Because real confidence doesn't need to declare itself. In fact, the moment you try too hard to prove you're confident, you're already losing it. There's a simple truth in psychology. Confidence is most powerful when it's demonstrated, not described. People don't believe you're confident because you say you are. They believe it when you move through the world in a way that shows you're not rushing to fill silence. You're not desperate for agreement. You're not afraid to say, I don't know. The paradox is that real confidence often shows up as restraint. Not shouting over others, but listening carefully. Not needing to dominate, but choosing when to speak. Not needing to prove anything, because your sense of self doesn't rely on outside validation. It's quiet, but unmistakable. Think of the person in a meeting who stays silent for most of the discussion and then says one thing that shifts the entire room. They didn't chase the spotlight, but when they spoke, everyone leaned in. That's confidence. Not the noise, but the weight. Social psychology calls this low verbal immediacy with high impact, the ability to communicate power through presence, not pressure. People respond to it instinctively because it signals composure, security, a calm internal center, and in a world full of posturing that stands out. This doesn't mean you need to be quiet all the time or avoid expressing your thoughts. It means understanding that how you say something often matters more than what you say. Confidence doesn't interrupt. It waits. Confidence doesn't fear disagreement. It welcomes it without folding. Confidence doesn't boast about its wins. It lets results speak for themselves. So if you want to be seen as confident, don't try to convince anyone. Instead, focus on alignment between your words and your behavior. Speak less, but mean more. Be willing to pause. Be willing to not know, because people don't remember the person who tried hardest to impress. They remember the one who didn't need to, and that kind of quiet strength, it echoes louder than any speech ever could. Ask, what would you do? There's a certain kind of question that makes people freeze up. Why did you do that? What were you thinking? Don't you see the problem? These questions feel like traps. They trigger defensiveness. They pull people into a corner, and once someone feels cornered, they stop thinking clearly. They shift into protection mode. Walls go up. Minds close. But there's a softer, more powerful question. One that doesn't provoke, it invites. If you were me, what would you do? It's disarming, unexpected, humble, and that humility changes everything. Psychologically, this question bypasses ego threat, the feeling that someone is challenging your intelligence, your status, your identity. Instead of accusing or confronting, you're offering perspective. You're saying, I trust your judgment. I want to understand through your eyes. And when people feel respected in that way, they tend to respond with more honesty, more thoughtfulness, sometimes even vulnerability. This is especially effective in moments of disagreement. Imagine you're stuck in a debate. A partner, a coworker, someone who just won't budge. You could argue harder, sharpen your points, press your case, or you could say, okay, let's flip this for a second. If you were in my position, what would you do? Now, instead of defending their side, they have to imagine yours. They step outside themselves, even briefly, and enter your frame. And that small shift can open doors logic alone never could. Therapists use this technique often, not by saying, here's what you should do, but by asking, what would you tell a friend in your situation? The moment someone thinks outside their own tangled emotions, they often see the answer more clearly because it feels safer that way. This isn't about tricking people, it's about changing the lens. Because when you stop pushing for agreement and instead ask for empathy, real thinking begins. So the next time a conversation feels stuck or someone is shut down, don't ask them to defend. Ask them to imagine, to reflect, to step across the gap, even briefly. Because sometimes the best answers don't come from proving a point. They come from offering a seat on your side of the table. The power of touch, used sparingly. Words carry meaning, tone adds depth, but sometimes the most powerful message is a single human touch. A hand on the shoulder, a brief touch on the arm, a steady handshake that lingers just long enough. It's subtle, it's fleeting, but it changes how people feel and how they remember you. Research into human behavior shows that appropriate brief touch can significantly increase cooperation, trust, and warmth between people. In one study, restaurant servers who lightly touched customers on the arm when returning change received noticeably higher tips. In another, people were more likely to return lost items or help a stranger if they were gently tapped on the shoulder when asked, "What changed?" Not the words. The physical signal of presence, touch when used with care, conveys what words can't. I see you. I'm here. You're safe. Human beings are wired for physical contact. From birth, it's one of the first ways we understand love, safety, attention. Even in adulthood, even when we've learned to talk our way through everything, touch remains primal. It bypasses analysis. It moves straight into memory, straight into meaning. But here's the nuance. It only works when it's respectful and appropriate. Touch can comfort, or it can cross boundaries. It can build trust, or feel intrusive. That's why its power lies in restraint, in choosing moments that match the relationship and the setting, not to assert dominance, not to manipulate, but to quietly reinforce connection. Think about the moments that stayed with you. Not the speeches or arguments, but the moments someone placed a steady hand on yours when you were afraid, or offered a reassuring pat when words would have felt empty. Touch can ground you, remind you that you're not floating alone. It's not the frequency that matters, it's the timing, the intent. Some things don't need to be said to be understood. A gesture can hold a message that language would only dilute. And in a world that often leans too heavily on words, a well-placed touch reminds us we're more than minds trying to persuade, we're bodies trying to connect. Give them an out. Why letting people say no leads to more yes. If you've ever felt pressured into saying yes to a favor, a sale, a meeting, a date, you know how quickly agreement can turn into resentment. People might nod along in the moment, but inside, they're pulling away, counting the seconds until it's over, looking for an exit. And often, that yes won't last, because pressure doesn't create commitment. It creates compliance. Short-lived, shaky, fragile. Now here's the paradox. If you want someone to say yes and mean it, you need to give them the freedom to say no, not just technically, emotionally. You need to create space where refusal doesn't feel like betrayal, where disagreement doesn't feel like conflict, where backing out doesn't feel like a trap door. That's the psychology behind what's called the right to refuse technique. In one study, researchers asked strangers to donate to a cause. The script was simple. Would you be willing to donate to help this charity? A fair number agreed. But when they added just one sentence, of course you're free to say no, compliance jumped dramatically. Because that small phrase dissolved resistance, it gave the listener permission to own the decision, to feel autonomous, not cornered. And when people feel in control of their choice, they're more likely to go along with it, not less. We're not wired to respond well to force. Even gentle, well-intentioned pressure can make people instinctively recoil. But when someone says, "It's totally okay if not," or "only if it works for you," it removes the invisible tension. It doesn't weaken your ask. It strengthens it because now their agreement is real. Think about how this applies in conversations you've had. A friend invites you to something but adds, "If you're not up for it, I completely understand." And suddenly you feel more inclined to go because you weren't guilted into it. A colleague asks for help but says, "No pressure if your plate's full." Now your willingness to help feels genuine, not coerced. This dynamic shows up everywhere. In sales, parenting, negotiation, even love. We don't want to feel obligated into yes. We want to feel that our yes matters because it was freely given. This doesn't mean being weak. You can still ask clearly, directly, even boldly. Just add air, add space. Let the door stay open in both directions. Because the most persuasive people, they don't try to trap you into yes. They invite you to choose it. And that quiet invitation, free of force, full of dignity, is almost impossible to resist. Set the frame first. Imagine walking into a room for a negotiation. You haven't sat down yet, haven't said a word. The other person smiles and says, "Let's figure out how we can both walk away happy." You're already halfway to compromise, not because of what they offered, but how they framed the situation. Before any facts are exchanged, before any arguments are made, one person has already shaped the space the conversation will take place in. And in psychology, this is called framing. Framing isn't manipulation, it's perspective setting. It's deciding what story the facts will live inside before the facts even arrive. And often the person who sets the frame wins. Not by overpowering, but by defining what the conversation is about in the first place. This shows up everywhere. In marketing, this isn't just a product. It's a lifestyle. In politics, it's not about safety versus danger. It's about freedom versus control. In relationships, this isn't a fight. It's a chance to understand each other better. All these are frames, ways of shaping meaning before content. And once a frame is set, the human mind tends to fill in the blanks accordingly. We don't see reality first. We see it through something. The most skilled communicators understand this. They don't just prepare their argument, they prepare the lens. They ask the first question. They choose the language. They decide whether something is described as a problem or a possibility. And that choice quietly alters how everything that follows is perceived. Let's say you're presenting a bold idea at work. If you open with, "I know this might sound crazy," but you've already planted doubt. But if you begin with, "Here's a direction that could put us ahead of the curve, and I want your input on it," now you've framed it as strategic, innovative, collaborative. The idea hasn't changed, only the context. But that context shapes how people hear you and how they respond. Framing isn't about spin. It's about attention, about guiding what people focus on and what they forget. Even something as small as saying, "What I admire about your approach is," before offering criticism can completely rewire how that feedback is received. So when the stakes are high or the message really matters, don't rush into your argument. First, set the table. Decide what kind of conversation this is going to be. Because in any interaction, the first person to shape the frame often doesn't need to win the debate. They've already won the room. The Zeigarnik Effect. You leave a movie halfway through. You turn off a song right before the final chorus. You walk out of a conversation where something important was just about to be said. Not because it was better than anything else you experienced that day, but because it was unfinished. There's something uniquely sticky about the things we almost complete. Our brains can't seem to let them go. This is known as the Zeigarnik Effect, named after psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, who noticed something curious in a Berlin cafe in the 1920s. She observed that waiters could remember complex, detailed orders with near-perfect recall, but only until the bill was paid. Once the order was complete, it disappeared from their minds. But if the order was still active, if something was pending, they remembered everything. Zeigarnik later tested this in the lab. Participants given tasks they weren't allowed to finish remembered them more vividly than the ones they completed. Why? Because completion closes loops, but incompletion leaves the brain buzzing, unresolved, unfinished, alert. This explains why cliffhangers in shows are so powerful. Why we keep thinking about emails we didn't send, conversations we never finished, dreams we gave up halfway through. The mind doesn't like open circuits. It wants to resolve them. That tension, that tiny itch of incompletion, keeps our attention circling back, even when we try to move on. Now, here's where this becomes more than trivia. If you're trying to remember something, motivate yourself, or hold someone's attention, you can use the Zeigarnik effect deliberately. For example, writers often stop mid-sentence at the end of their day, so when they return, the momentum is still alive. Speakers leave a question open at the start of a presentation, something the audience subconsciously waits to have resolved. Teachers assign projects in pieces, making students mentally invest before the reward, unfinished engaging. Even your to-do list becomes more emotionally charged when items are partially started. It's why starting a task, even for 5 minutes, increases your chances of finishing it later, because now your brain is invested. It wants to close the loop. On a deeper level, this effect mirrors something universal in human experience: the relationships we never repaired, the projects we abandoned, the versions of ourselves we almost became. Sometimes what haunts us isn't failure. It's the echo of something incomplete. So whether you're trying to engage others or unlock your own momentum, remember, the brain remembers what's unfinished. Leave just enough undone and something in us leans forward, craving the closure. And in that leaning, attention lives. The peak end rule: how we remember moments isn't how they happened. Think back to your last vacation. A full week of sun, food, new places. Now, what do you actually remember? Chances are, 2 things stand out more than anything else. The most intense moment, good or bad, how it ended. You might forget long stretches of calm, even joy, but that one frustrating delay at the airport, still vivid. Or that perfect sunset on the final evening. Somehow, everything else feels defined by it. This is the peak end rule, a psychological shortcut the brain uses to summarize experiences. We don't remember most events as full stories. We remember them by their emotional peak and how they concluded. This concept was first explored by psychologist Daniel Kahneman. In one famous study, participants had to undergo 2 versions of a painful experience. One version ended sharply at a high level of discomfort. The other was longer, but ended with a slightly less painful final moment. Oddly, people rated the longer, objectively worse version more favorably just because it ended better. Their brain didn't average the whole experience. It highlighted the peak and the end. And that's what shaped the memory. This rule doesn't just apply to pain. It shapes how we remember almost everything. Relationships. We often judge the entire relationship based on the highest high and how it ended. Movies. A strong final scene can redeem a slow middle. Jobs. The last few months can outweigh years of growth. Even daily conversations are remembered by how they made us feel at their most emotional and whether they left us with tension. This has quiet power when used with intention. If you're designing an experience, a class, a date, a presentation, pay close attention to the emotional peak. What's the most intense moment your audience will feel? The ending. Are you giving closure, clarity, or emotional resonance? The middle can meander. But if the peak is meaningful and the end is satisfying, the memory will hold strong. And on a personal level, if you want to reshape how you remember parts of your own life, you don't have to rewrite the whole story. Sometimes it's enough to reshape how it ends. A difficult day can be redeemed by a moment of kindness at the close. A strained conversation can soften with one honest sentence before goodbye. We think we're trapped by the full weight of everything that's happened. But memory is malleable. It's edited, compressed, re-summarized, often by just 2 moments. We chase perfection, expecting people to remember the whole arc, but they rarely do. They remember how you made them feel at the highest point and how you left them at the very end. So when in doubt, finish well. Because sometimes how you close the door matters more than everything that came before it. And in that final moment, you might not rewrite history, but you just might reshape how it lives in someone's mind. Scarcity and urgency. You weren't thinking about buying it. But then you see the sign, only 2 left in stock. Suddenly, you're hovering over the button. Even if you didn't want it before, now it feels important. Scarcity. It's one of the oldest and most powerful levers in human psychology. Scarcity isn't just about supply. It's about attention, desire. When something becomes less available, we don't just notice it more, we value it more. Even if nothing else about it changes, the same product, the same offer, the same opportunity, but when you're told it's rare or limited or slipping away, your brain enters a different mode. Psychologists call this the scarcity principle, a concept deeply tied to our survival instincts. In early human history, what was rare often meant what was necessary: food in a drought, shelter in a storm. When something became scarce, it became vital. That wiring still lives in us. Except now, it's not about firewood or water. It's about products, opportunities, relationships, time. Add urgency to scarcity, a deadline, a ticking clock, and the effect doubles. Offer ends tonight. You have 15 minutes to claim this. After this week, it's gone. These signals activate what behavioral economists call loss anticipation, the emotional discomfort of missing out. You haven't even lost the thing yet, but the idea of losing it creates pressure to act. And so we do, even when we're not sure why. This shows up beyond shopping and sales. A job application closing in 2 days feels more meaningful than one with no deadline. A person who suddenly becomes less emotionally available is often perceived as more desirable. A party invitation with limited spots creates more buzz than one open to all. We are wired to chase what might escape us. But this isn't just something that's used on us. It's also something we use, often without knowing. When you say to a friend, "I won't ask again," you're creating urgency. When you tell your team, "We only have this window to move," you're creating scarcity, and if it's genuine, people move. Of course, overuse kills the magic. False urgency becomes noise. Fake scarcity breeds distrust. But when rooted in truth, these signals cut through hesitation. Because in a world full of abundance, what's rare feels meaningful. What's fleeting feels valuable, and what might vanish often becomes exactly what we want to keep. Social proof. You're in a new city, walking past 2 restaurants. One is empty. The other has a line out the door. Without reading a single review, without knowing anything about the menu, you already feel drawn to the one with the crowd. Because of something quiet but deeply wired, if other people like it, it must be good. That's social proof, the human tendency to use other people's behavior as a shortcut for making our own decisions. In a complex world, we can't analyze everything. We don't have time to vet every product, every person, every idea, so we look for signals. And one of the most powerful signals is what everyone else is doing. This video has 4.9 million views. This product is Amazon's Hot 1 bestseller. This book has been translated into 36 languages. Everyone's talking about it. None of these tell us the actual quality of the thing, but they tell us something else: social validation. And that's often enough to tip us from hesitation to action. This instinct isn't new. In ancient tribes, if everyone suddenly started running, you didn't stop to ask why. You ran. Your survival depended on matching the group. Even today, our brains are constantly scanning the crowd. We tend to assume the group knows something we don't. That's why applause spreads in waves. Why laughter in a room grows louder after the first few chuckles. Why a tip jar that already has bills inside fills up faster than an empty one. Social proof doesn't just reflect behavior, it amplifies it. In marketing, this principle is used deliberately. Over 10,000 satisfied customers joined the fastest-growing community. Is seen on. People who bought this also bought. These aren't facts. They're comfort. They say, "You're not alone in liking this." And we like knowing we're not alone. But social proof isn't always rational. We sometimes follow crowds even when they're wrong. Classic experiments show people giving clearly incorrect answers to simple questions just because others around them did. This is called informational conformity. The fear of standing out can override even what we know is true. Because deep down, we're not just asking, what's right? We're also asking, what's safe? And safety, for much of human history, meant belonging. On a more personal level, this affects how we build trust. If someone is introduced with praise, everyone loves working with her, you're more likely to listen with an open mind. If a stranger compliments you after hearing others do the same, you're more likely to believe it. We are social creatures. And belief is often a shared construction. If you want an idea to spread, or a product to sell, or a message to land, sometimes the best thing you can do is show that others already believe in it. Because people follow people, and once momentum is visible, it becomes contagious, not because they're weak, but because we are wired to look sideways before we leap. The spotlight effect. You're walking into a room and you realize your shirt has a tiny stain. You feel like everyone is going to notice. Every eye will go to it. You imagine whispers, silent judgment, embarrassment. But then something strange happens. No one reacts. No one even seems to care. It's not because they're polite. It's because they're not looking. Not at you. Not the way you think. Welcome to what psychologists call the spotlight effect, the tendency to dramatically overestimate how much other people notice and remember what we do. This isn't vanity. It's how our brains work. To us, we are the center of our world, our thoughts, our perspective, our inner narrator. So when something feels big to us, a mistake, a weird comment, an awkward gesture, we assume it must be big for others too. But the truth is, most people are too busy living inside their own heads to pay close attention to ours. They're worried about their own awkwardness, their own stain, their own spotlight. In one classic experiment, students were asked to wear a bright, embarrassing t-shirt, often featuring a celebrity or slogan, into a room of strangers. Afterward, they were asked how many people they thought noticed the shirt. On average, they guessed that nearly half the room had noticed. In reality, barely 20% had. That's the spotlight effect in action. We feel exposed. But to others, we're just another background detail in their much louder inner world. This matters more than it seems. Because the spotlight effect often holds us back. From speaking up in meetings because we might say something dumb, from wearing what we want because it might look too much, from sharing our ideas, our voices, our real selves, because someone might notice and judge. But most of the time, the audience we fear doesn't exist, or if it does, it's far less attentive and far more forgiving than we imagine. There's a quiet freedom in realizing this, that most people are not keeping score. That your worst moment today will likely be forgotten by tomorrow, not out of cruelty, but because everyone else is managing their own chaos. They're not thinking about your hair, or your typo, or your stutter during that presentation. They're thinking about themselves, just like you are. This isn't a reason to be careless, but it's a reason to be braver, to raise your hand, to tell your story, to take up a little more space without apology. Because once you stop assuming the spotlight is always on you, you begin to move more freely. And strangely, that freedom, that confidence, it tends to attract the right kind of attention, the kind you never needed to chase. The yes ladder. Convincing someone to agree with you can feel like trying to push a boulder uphill. Whether it's persuading a client, pitching a new idea, or asking for help, the big yes we want can seem distant, even unreachable. But here's the secret. You don't need to leap to the top. You just need to build a ladder. Psychologists call it the yes ladder, a technique based on a simple, elegant truth. If someone says yes to something small, they're more likely to say yes to something bigger later. This idea builds on the consistency principle, one of the most powerful forces in human behavior. We like to see ourselves as consistent. If I say yes once, even to a tiny request, I begin to shape an identity around that behavior. I agreed to support this. I'm the kind of person who helps with this. I've already said yes. I might as well continue. The mind loves internal harmony, and small acts create emotional momentum. Imagine you're trying to get people to donate to a cause. If you start by asking for $100, you'll get resistance. But if you ask them to sign a petition first, a tiny, low-effort commitment, many will say yes. Now that they've signed, they've declared themselves as supporters of the cause. So when you later ask for a donation, they're no longer deciding from scratch. They're following through on who they've already agreed to be. That's the ladder at work. You see this in sales all the time: a free trial before a paid subscription, a sample before the full product, a quiz before the consultation, a like before a follow before a buy. Each step is designed not to persuade, but to prepare, to create a pattern of agreement that builds upon itself. It works in conversations too. Let's say you're trying to introduce a new idea to your team. Instead of leading with, "I think we should completely change our approach," you start with a small question. Would you agree that the current process is a bit inefficient? If they say yes, and they likely will, they're now mentally aligned with your framing. From there, each next yes is easier. Each step smaller than the whole, but leading toward the same direction. This technique isn't about manipulation. It's about pacing the request so the listener's mind can keep up emotionally. Big jumps create resistance. Small steps create rhythm, and rhythm leads to trust. So instead of pushing harder for that giant yes, start smaller. Ask for agreement where it's easy. Then move up one step at a time. Because when someone climbs a ladder with you, even if it starts with a single yes, they're far more likely to follow you all the way to the top. Echo their last words. You're talking to someone, a friend, a partner, a client. They're telling you something that clearly matters to them. You nod. You're listening. You're even preparing a good response. But later they still say, "I don't feel like you really heard me." Why? Because listening isn't just about hearing the words, it's about reflecting them back in a way that proves you absorbed what they meant. One of the simplest, most overlooked tricks in psychology is this: repeat the last few words the other person just said, softly, curiously, without judgment. It's called echoing, and it's a deceptively powerful tool in building trust, connection, and even persuasion. Here's how it works. Imagine someone says, "I just feel like I'm under so much pressure lately." Instead of jumping into advice, you quietly repeat, "Under so much pressure," that's it. Just the last fragment, echoed gently, and suddenly, something opens. They continue, "Go deeper." expand. Because now they feel not just acknowledged, but felt. This technique is used by hostage negotiators, therapists, and high-level sales professionals. In crisis negotiations, echoing helps keep volatile people talking, and talking is safer than silence. In therapy, it encourages people to clarify their thoughts in real time. In sales, it helps prospects feel that their concerns are being truly understood, not just handled. But here's what makes it so powerful in everyday life. It creates psychological safety, not by solving anything, but by showing the speaker that you're tuned to their frequency. Echoing works on a few levels. Validation. It shows you're paying attention to exactly what they said. Clarification. It invites them to explain further, without pressure. Connection. It synchronizes the rhythm of the conversation. And the best part, you don't need to do it constantly. Just once, at the right moment, is enough to shift the energy of an entire dialogue. Compare these two responses. Them, I'm just afraid I'll fail again. You, no, don't think like that. You'll be fine. Versus you, fail again. The first response is encouragement, but the second is recognition. It shows you heard the exact words they chose, and often that matters more than reassurance. We rush to fix, to reassure, to respond with wisdom. But people don't open up because they were impressed by what you said. They open up because they felt seen in what they said. And echoing gives you that moment, clean, small, human. In a world full of noise and speed, most people are not looking for perfect answers. They're looking for a pause, a mirror, a signal that their inner experience isn't invisible. So try this. When someone's speaking, really speaking, don't rush ahead. Just let their last few words hang in the air and gently hand them back. You'd be surprised how often those words come back larger, fuller, more honest. Sometimes, the way deeper connection begins is with something as small as a sentence that sounds exactly like the one before it. The IKEA Effect. You buy a bookshelf, not a beautiful handcrafted one. A basic flat pack from IKEA. It comes in a box with 32 screws, 14 wooden slats, vague instructions, and that tiny hex key. You spend the next 2 hours swearing, sweating, rechecking step 9, but eventually it stands. And strangely, despite the wonky corner, you feel proud. You step back, admire it. Maybe even love it a little more than that expensive shelf you didn't have to assemble. That strange affection is what psychologists call the IKEA effect, the tendency for people to place disproportionately high value on things they helped create, even if the result isn't perfect. This principle doesn't just apply to furniture, it's everywhere. When you cook a meal from scratch, it tastes better. When you build a business, its flaws feel charming. When you write your own speech, you're less likely to accept edits, even when they improve it. Because effort isn't just labor, it's emotional ownership. In one study, participants were asked to fold origami figures. Afterward, they were asked how much the figures were worth. Strikingly, those who folded them themselves were willing to pay 5 times more than others were. And even more fascinating, their work wasn't objectively better, but their connection to it was. They'd invested effort, struggled, adjusted. Figured it out, and that process created meaning. This has massive implications. If you want someone to care about an idea, don't just present it perfectly, invite them in. Let them contribute, shape, tweak. Even if it slows things down, even if the result is a little rougher, they'll care more because it's theirs now too. This works in relationships. People who help plan the vacation enjoy it more. People who contribute to a gift feel more connected to the giving. People who participate in solutions feel more committed to the outcome. The IKEA effect teaches us something subtle and powerful. People fall in love with what they build, even if it's messy, flawed, or frustrating. Of course, there's a shadow side. We can become too attached to things we helped create, even when they're no longer useful. Old projects, broken systems, relationships that don't work anymore, we stick around because we made it. So the trick isn't just to build. It's to build with purpose and to recognize when effort becomes ego. But when used well, this effect is a gift. It reminds us that meaning doesn't come from perfection, it comes from participation. So if you want someone to value what you're creating, don't hand them the final product. Hand them the pieces. Let them hold the hex key. Because in life, just like in furniture, the things we assemble ourselves tend to become the ones we keep. Use we, not you. You need to work harder. You should have said something earlier. You don't understand what's at stake. Even when they're said gently, these sentences land with a sting. Because the word you, especially in moments of tension, often feels like a finger pointing, it isolates. It divides. It draws a line between me and you. But shift one word, and everything softens. We need to work through this. We might have missed the timing. We're not seeing eye to eye yet. Now it's not me versus you. It's us versus the problem. This is the quiet magic of inclusive language, especially the word we. Psychologically, it creates shared identity. A sense that we're on the same team, inside the same experience, trying to solve something together. That changes how people listen. And more importantly, how they feel. Studies in conflict resolution show that people are significantly more open to feedback when it's framed in collective terms. Let's find a way forward works better than you need to change. Why? Because we doesn't trigger defensiveness. It wraps the challenge inside belonging, and belonging makes discomfort easier to carry. This principle shows up in great leadership too. A manager who says, "We've fallen behind this quarter," invites accountability. But one who says, "You didn't hit your targets," creates shame. In relationships, the shift is just as dramatic. Instead of, "You never listen to me, try," "We're having trouble hearing each other." Instead of, "You're always on your phone, try," "We haven't really connected this evening." Same concern. Different emotional result. This doesn't mean taking blame for things that aren't yours. It's not about false harmony. It's about language that aligns, not divides. Because once people feel like they're being accused, their capacity to hear you vanishes. But when they feel like you're in it with them, something opens. Even hard conversations become safer when wrapped in the quiet protection of we, and sometimes it's not about conflict at all. In times of uncertainty, confusion, fear, the word we can be grounding. We'll figure it out. We've been through worse. We're not alone. These aren't just comforting phrases. They're psychological anchors. They remind us that whatever this moment is, it doesn't have to be carried alone. In a world that often feels divided, in opinion, in identity, in attention, words that bridge matter more than ever. And sometimes, the most powerful bridge begins with the smallest shift. Not you, but we. One word. But it puts us back on the same side of the table, right where connection begins. Disarm with vulnerability. There's a moment in every conversation where the tension rises, where someone expects you to have an answer, to be certain, to lead, and in that moment, many people do what feels natural. They fake it. They bluff, they double down on confidence they don't actually feel. Because the fear of seeming weak is so deeply rooted, we often choose pretense over honesty. But what if the opposite is more powerful? What if saying, "I don't know. I was wrong. That scares me too," makes people trust you more, not less? This is the counterintuitive power of vulnerability, not as confession, but as connection. We're conditioned to associate vulnerability with weakness, to believe that showing uncertainty is dangerous, that it makes us small. But research tells a different story. In one study, job candidates who admitted to a small mistake when otherwise qualified were rated more likable and more trustworthy than those who presented themselves as flawless. This is known as the pratfall effect. When people see you as competent, a little imperfection actually makes you more relatable. It humanizes you. But it's more than just admitting flaws. Vulnerability is also about going first, being the one willing to say something real. I'm nervous about this too. I've struggled with that before. I don't have the answer, but I want to figure it out with you. These aren't just statements. They're invitations. They lower the emotional temperature of a room. They signal safety. They let the other person exhale, because now perfection is no longer the price of admission. You see this in leadership. A manager who says, "I'm not sure how this will play out, but I believe in this team," often earns more loyalty than one who pretends to have every variable under control. Because confidence without vulnerability can feel cold, but confidence with vulnerability feels authentic. It says, "I'm real. I'm human. I'm not hiding behind the role." And that kind of presence builds something deeper than authority. It builds trust. In relationships, vulnerability cracks open doors that logic can't. When someone shares their fear instead of just their opinion, or their uncertainty instead of just their point, walls begin to lower. Because underneath all our masks, we're all wondering the same thing. If I show you who I really am, will I still be accepted? And when the answer is yes, that moment becomes unforgettable. This isn't about oversharing. It's about choosing truth over performance, depth over defense. Not because it guarantees approval, but because it creates something that surface-level strength never can: emotional gravity. The kind that makes people stay in the room, stay in the conversation, stay close. Not because you dazzled them, but because you let them see something real. And in a world full of armor, that kind of courage, it doesn't just stand out, it stays. Name the elephant in the room. There's a silence that fills a room, not because nothing is being said, but because something important isn't. It might be tension after an argument, an awkward truth no one wants to touch, a shared discomfort that everyone feels but pretends not to. People are talking, words are flowing, but underneath it all is the elephant in the room. And until someone acknowledges it, nothing truly moves forward. The human brain is exquisitely tuned to detect incongruence. We may not know the full story, but we sense when something's off. The fake smile, the avoided glance, the topic that keeps getting dodged. And ironically, the more people avoid addressing it, the more power it gains. That's the trap of the unspoken. It grows louder the longer it's ignored. Naming the elephant, whatever it is, takes courage. Because doing so risks discomfort. It breaks the illusion of harmony. It interrupts the performance. But paradoxically, that interruption is often what makes people breathe again. Psychologists refer to this as tension diffusion, the idea that simply naming a shared but unspoken tension can immediately reduce anxiety and increase trust. It's not about solving everything. It's about creating the conditions where truth can exist in the open. I get the sense that this isn't easy for any of us to talk about. I know we've been avoiding this conversation, and that's okay, but maybe it's time. It feels like there's something we're all thinking, but no one's saying. Simple statements. But they pierce through layers of pretense. They say, we don't have to keep pretending. We can be real now. In leadership, this often shows up when something has gone wrong, and no one wants to address it: a failed project, a quiet loss of morale, a rift on the team. When a leader steps in and names what everyone already knows, it doesn't create instability, it creates relief, because now people can stop bracing. The tension has shape. It can be talked about, worked through. In personal relationships, this might be the unsaid feeling, the distance growing, the resentment that's never acknowledged, the grief that's quietly swallowed every day. Naming it doesn't guarantee healing, but it's the first step toward it, because pain that can't be spoken turns into silence that never ends. This doesn't mean confronting everything all the time. It means sensing when the room or the relationship is heavy with what's unspoken, and then choosing gently to speak into that space, not to force resolution, but to release the pressure. We spend so much time fearing that truth will break things, but more often, it's the pretending that does. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can offer a group, a partner, a friend, is the permission to stop acting. To let the words match the feeling, to let the silence break, to say, clearly and calmly, it's okay, we both know it's there. Let's not keep walking around it, because when someone dares to name the elephant, the room becomes a room again. And people, finally, can show up as they are. Pre-suasion. Most people think persuasion begins the moment you say something. That your words, tone, arguments, all of that determines whether someone will agree with you or not. But there's something more subtle, more powerful, and far more overlooked. What happens right before you speak? That space, the psychological setup, is where influence quietly begins. This is the concept of persuasion, a term coined by psychologist Robert Cialdini. It's the art of shaping someone's attention before the message arrives, so they're already leaning towards your conclusion before you've even made your case. Imagine this. You walk into a job interview. The interviewer doesn't begin with your resume. Instead, they ask, "Before we start, can you tell me about a moment when you felt proud of your work?" Suddenly, your brain is in achievement mode. You feel capable. You speak with more energy. Now, when they ask about your qualifications, you frame everything through that pride. Nothing about your actual answers has changed, but the mental lens was tilted before the conversation even began. That's persuasion. It works by directing attention. And attention, in psychology, acts like a spotlight. Whatever it lands on seems more important, more true, more persuasive. If I guide your attention to the idea of safety, you'll evaluate everything through that lens. If I steer your attention toward fairness, you'll judge outcomes by how equal they feel. Persuasion isn't deception, it's framing, done in advance. And when done ethically, it can create clarity, not manipulation. You see it in advertising. A toothpaste brand shows smiling people before listing dental benefits. A political ad shows a peaceful family dinner before discussing national security. A dating app shows success stories before asking you to sign up. Before the message comes, the emotion is already primed. You see it in everyday life too. A teacher begins class by asking, "What do you already know about this topic?" Now students feel competent, not lost. A parent opens a tough conversation with, "I know you're trying your best lately." Now the child isn't on defense, they're leaning in. A friend says, "Can I ask something that's a little vulnerable?" Now you're emotionally prepared for honesty. Each of these moments shapes the soil before the seed is planted. The takeaway is this: if you want someone to receive your message, don't just polish your words, prime their mindset. Even small shifts matter. The environment you speak in, the tone of your first sentence, the memory or emotion you evoke before the request. You're not changing the facts. You're changing how ready someone is to hear them. And in a world flooded with noise, the most powerful messages aren't always the loudest. They're the ones that arrive in prepared minds. So don't just ask, "What should I say?" Ask, "What do I want them to feel before I say it?" That moment, the one before the first word, is where the real conversation begins. Use anchoring. You walk into a store looking for a jacket. The first one you see is priced at $480. It's nice, but you hesitate. Then you see another, $195. Suddenly, that second jacket feels affordable, even though, 5 minutes ago, $195 might have sounded like too much. What just happened? That's anchoring, the psychological bias where the first number or idea we encounter becomes the anchor that frames everything that comes after it. And once that anchor is set, we don't judge in isolation, we judge in relation. This principle doesn't just apply to money. If someone says, "This will only take 10 minutes, and it takes 20, it feels long. But if they say, "This might take an hour, and it takes 20, it feels short." Same result, different experience. Because the anchor changed your expectation. Anchoring happens everywhere, in business, relationships, negotiations, education. In salary talks, the first number mentioned becomes the reference point. Even if it's arbitrary, it exerts a gravitational pull on the conversation. In real estate, a home listed at $899,000 will influence how reasonable $850,000 feels, even if the actual value is closer to $750,000. We like to think we're rational, but our brains are constantly calibrating based on context, not just facts. And whoever sets the context first often shapes the outcome. This is why skilled negotiators try to speak first, not because they want control, but because they want to set the frame. If you start with "what's the lowest you'll go," you're letting the other person anchor you. But if you begin with "here's what I'm budgeting for this range," you're the one placing the first stone. Anchoring also affects self-perception. If someone introduces you as the smartest person in the room, people filter your words through that frame. If you open a speech by sharing your biggest failure, suddenly your later successes feel more meaningful. The order changes the weight. The frame shapes the story. Anchoring isn't always conscious. It works even when we're not aware of it. One experiment asked people, did Gandhi die before or after the age of 140? Then followed up with, how old was he when he died? The group exposed to the absurd number 140 gave significantly higher estimates than those who weren't. The number was nonsense, but the mind still used it as a starting point. Understanding anchoring doesn't mean you have to manipulate people. It means recognizing that the starting point matters more than we think. So whether you're pitching an idea, discussing boundaries, or introducing yourself to someone new, ask yourself, what's the first expectation I'm setting, even before I get to the point? Because once an anchor drops, it doesn't just color what comes next, it quietly rewrites it. And learning how to drop the right anchor, that's the difference between being heard and being understood. Make it about them. You've got something important to say. A message to pitch, a story to tell, a point to make, so you prepare. You sharpen your words. You rehearse your delivery. You get everything right. And yet, they tune out. You were clear, smart, passionate. But they didn't lean in, because here's the hard truth. People don't care how good you are at talking. They care how deeply you're tuned into them. In psychology, this is often described through the lens of self-relevance. We're wired to prioritize information that relates directly to our identity, our goals, our emotions. If you walk into a crowded room and someone says your name, you'll hear it instantly, even if they whisper. That's your brain filtering for relevance. It's not selfish, it's efficient. So when we're communicating, whether in a pitch, a conversation, or a relationship, the moment we make it all about ourselves, we lose that filter. But the moment we shift the frame to them, everything opens. Compare these two approaches. Let me tell you what I've achieved, versus here's something I learned that might help you. The first is a spotlight. The second is a bridge. It's a subtle difference, but it changes the dynamic completely. Now they're not just listening, they're seeing themselves in what you're saying, and that's when real attention begins. This is especially important in influence. People are more open to ideas when those ideas are presented in terms of their own goals and values. If you're pitching a product, don't talk about how innovative it is. Talk about how it saves them time. If you're leading a team, don't talk about your vision. Talk about how their work shapes it. If you're apologizing, don't say what you went through. Acknowledge what they felt, because empathy isn't soft. It's precision. It's knowing where your voice ends and their ears begin. In relationships, this principle goes even deeper. When someone shares something painful, we often respond with, "Yeah, I've been through that too." But often it makes the moment about you. Instead, try, "That sounds incredibly heavy. Do you want to tell me more about it?" Now the spotlight stays where it belongs, on them, and with that, trust builds. None of this means you shouldn't share your truth, but sharing lands better when it feels offered, not performed. And more often than not, the message that reaches people is the one that quietly says, "This isn't about me showing you who I am. It's about me seeing who you are and meeting you there." So if you're wondering why your voice isn't landing, maybe it's not about volume or polish or force. Maybe it's about focus. Because sometimes the fastest way to be heard is to stop trying to be impressive and start trying to be useful. That shift? It doesn't just change how people listen, it changes what they remember. Lower your voice. Some people walk into a room and immediately command attention. They're not loud, they don't need to be. Their presence does the talking, and when they do speak, people listen. One of the most overlooked elements in how we perceive someone's confidence and credibility is their voice, not just what they say, but how low they say it. Across cultures, lower-pitched voices are consistently associated with qualities like strength, confidence, leadership, and even trustworthiness. In fact, studies show that people with deeper vocal tones are more likely to be elected to office, chosen as CEOs, or assumed to be more competent, even when their words are identical to someone speaking at a higher pitch. It's not fair. It's not always accurate. But it's how our perception works. And once you understand it, you can use it, carefully, intentionally, to shift how people receive your words. Now let's be clear. You don't need to fake a movie trailer voice. This isn't about growling through your sentences or lowering your voice so much that it sounds unnatural. It's about dropping into a grounded register, the vocal space where your breath is steady, your words are unhurried, and your voice resonates from your chest, not your throat. That tone doesn't just sound more confident. It feels more confident to you and to everyone listening. Here's the psychology behind it. High-pitched voices are often linked to excitement, anxiety, or emotional urgency. They rise when we're nervous, apologetic, or trying too hard to please. Lower tones, in contrast, signal control. They say, "I'm not rushing. I'm not afraid. I mean what I'm saying." Even slight changes, slowing your speech, grounding your breath, softening your inflection, can dramatically shift how others experience you. This doesn't just apply to public speaking. In personal conversations, lowering your voice can diffuse tension. It signals calm and invites the other person to match your pace. In negotiation, a calm, low voice projects certainty without aggression. It doesn't provoke. It centers. In leadership, it creates a quiet presence that doesn't need to shout. It speaks into the room with gravity, not volume. It also affects how you experience yourself. The act of slowing down, breathing deeply, and grounding your tone often has an internal effect. It calms your nervous system. It brings your thoughts into alignment. It makes you feel more prepared, even if you weren't at first, because posture isn't just physical. Voice is posture too. And when your voice stands tall, so do you. There's power in silence. And there's power in speaking from the kind of silence that doesn't tremble. So the next time you have something important to say, pause, breathe, and let the words come from a place lower than fear. Not louder, just lower. Because sometimes the voice people trust most is the one that doesn't rush to prove anything. It just knows what it means and lets you hear it. The rule of 3. There's something about 3, not 2. Not 4, 3. It shows up in every corner of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Stop, drop, and roll. Mind, body, spirit, past, present, future. It's not just poetic. It's not just repetition. It's psychological architecture. The human brain is wired to recognize and remember ideas when they arrive in threes. Psychologists have studied this through what's called chunking, the way we break information into manageable units. Our short-term memory is limited. Too many details, and we start to lose them. But 3? 3 feels complete, not overwhelming, not simplistic, just enough. This is why comedians often tell jokes in threes: setup, reinforce, twist. You expect the third thing to fit a pattern, so when it flips or surprises, you laugh. It's why persuasive speeches are often structured as the problem, the insight, the solution. 3 allows for tension, development, and resolution, a story arc inside a sentence. It's storytelling. In miniature. In marketing, this is used constantly. Easy, fast, affordable, built for speed, designed for comfort, backed by science. Rate it, love it, share it. Each phrase is a hook, but the third line seals it. Without it, the idea feels unfinished. With it, it feels complete. Even in personal conversation, the rule of 3 is powerful. Instead of saying, "I appreciate you," you might say, "I appreciate your time, your honesty, and your patience." That final layer doesn't just fill space, it adds weight. Not because you said more, but because it echoed just long enough to land. If you want your ideas to stick, or your words to echo just a little longer after they're spoken, don't always try to be brilliant. Try to be structured. Say what you mean, say it again with texture, then close the loop with impact. Not once, not twice, but just the right number of times. Some truths deserve more than one note, but the melody that stays, it's almost always in 3, like a heartbeat. Like a rhythm we were born remembering, even before we learned how to speak. Silence. After a question. You ask a question. There's a pause. A beat of silence. The other person looks away, or shifts in their seat. You feel the urge to jump in, to soften the moment, rephrase, explain yourself. But if you do, you'll miss what was about to surface. Because silence, especially after a question, is one of the most underestimated tools in human communication. We're trained to fear silence, to treat it like something to fix, to believe that if a moment stretches too long, something's wrong. But silence isn't a failure. It's a signal. A signal that something is processing. A thought is being formed. An emotion is surfacing that didn't have language yet. In negotiations, silence after a proposal often brings out the real concerns, not the rehearsed ones, the real ones. What people say after the pause is often the truth they didn't plan to reveal. In therapy, silence after a deep question gives the client permission to go deeper than reflex, into the place they actually live. In parenting, silence after a child opens up says, "You don't have to rush. I'm here. Take your time." Silence is pressure, but it's the right kind of pressure, not the kind that pushes, the kind that draws out. Most people rush to fill it. They ask, "Does that make sense? Did I explain that right? You know what I mean?" But when you speak into the silence, you relieve tension, and you also take away the chance for something deeper to emerge. Sometimes the second answer, the one that follows the pause, is the real one, and it only shows up if you stay still long enough to receive it. Even internally, this applies. Ask yourself something hard. What am I actually afraid of here? What do I need right now? What would I say if I didn't care what anyone thought? Then wait. No journaling, no reacting, no forcing the answer out. Just breathe, sit with the question, and give it room. It might take 5 seconds. It might take 5 minutes. But if you can resist the urge to escape the quiet, you may be surprised at what speaks in its place. Words create shape. But silence is where the truth gathers. And if you can stand still long enough, you'll hear the sound of someone, maybe even yourself, stepping forward into it. Not because you demanded it, but because you finally made space for it to arrive. The power of not yet. You say, "I can't do this," and the thought hits hard, like a closed door, heavy, final. You've tried. You've stumbled. It didn't work. The evidence is clear, right? You failed. But what if that statement had one more word? "I can't do this yet." Just 3 letters. But suddenly, the door doesn't feel locked. It just feels unfinished. This is the subtle power of not yet. It's the language of what psychologists call a growth mindset, the belief that abilities aren't fixed traits, but skills in motion. Carol Dweck, who pioneered this research, found that students who believed their intelligence could grow with effort performed significantly better over time than those who thought their intelligence was fixed. Not because they were smarter, but because they kept going. Not yet is a quiet rebellion against finality. It refuses to let the present moment define the whole story. I'm not confident with public speaking becomes I'm not confident yet. I don't understand this subject becomes I don't understand it yet. It's not about denial. It's about trajectory, because not yet implies movement, possibility. It keeps the engine running. This shift doesn't just change performance, it changes how we feel about ourselves. Without not yet, every setback feels like identity. With it, setbacks become feedback. Failure becomes information, and the struggle becomes part of the work, not proof that we should stop. There's a kind of grace in speaking to yourself this way, not with fake positivity, not with slogans or self-help mantras, just with the reminder that everything alive is still becoming, including you. The most powerful moments of change don't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in how you speak to yourself when no one else is listening. So when you catch your mind closing doors, pause. Add 3 letters. Let the sentence stay open a little longer, and in that space, you might start to hear the future breathing. Ask, what's the real problem here? You're overwhelmed, deadlines are crashing, someone said something that rubbed you the wrong way. You're snapping at small things, irritated by what shouldn't matter. And in that swirl of reaction, it's easy to say, I'm just stressed. It's been a long day. People are being difficult. But every now and then, the moment calls for a different question. What's the real problem here? Not the surface one. Not the loud one, but the one that's hiding behind all the noise, quietly pulling the strings. This question doesn't accuse. It opens. It's the kind of question used by therapists, negotiators, and great leaders, not because it delivers instant clarity, but because it disrupts the momentum of the wrong story. In psychology, this is known as reframing, a shift in how we interpret the situation, often revealing something unexpected beneath the obvious. And it's powerful, because most of us walk through life treating symptoms, not causes. You're angry your partner didn't text back. But the real problem isn't the delay, it's that you've been feeling distant for weeks and haven't said it out loud. You're panicking about your presentation. But the real problem isn't the slides, it's the quiet belief that you're not supposed to be in the room at all. You're upset the project is behind schedule. But maybe the real problem is that you've been carrying it alone and you're afraid to ask for help. The first problem is rarely the final one. It's a doorway. And if you ask the question, with honesty, with patience, with genuine interest, you start to see the layers. Not to blame yourself, not to dissect endlessly, but to understand what part of you actually needs attention. This also transforms how you speak to others. When someone's lashing out, withdrawing, or procrastinating, it's easy to respond to their behavior. But sometimes, the more helpful path is to ask, gently, without pressure, hey, is this really about that email? Is something else going on underneath? You're not interrogating. You're offering curiosity in place of judgment, and sometimes that's all someone needs to say something true. The real problem is often quieter than the obvious one. It doesn't wave its arms or stomp its feet. It just waits, under the rehearsed answers, beneath the reflex reactions, to be named. And once it is, things begin to shift. Not because the solution is simple, but because now you're aiming at the right target. There's relief in that. Not certainty, but direction. And sometimes, that's what clears the fog. The Pygmalion Effect. You walk into a room, a teacher looks at you with curiosity. A manager greets you with quiet respect. A friend asks you a hard question, not because they doubt you, but because they believe you can answer it. And in that moment, something shifts. You feel yourself stand a little taller. You reach a little further. You begin to believe in a version of yourself because someone else already does. That's the power of expectations. And it's not just a feeling, it's a measurable phenomenon. It's called the Pygmalion Effect. In the late 1960s, psychologists Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson conducted a groundbreaking study in a school setting. They randomly selected a handful of students and told their teachers that these students were identified as having high potential for growth, academic bloomers. What the teachers didn't know: the students weren't special. They were picked at random, but months later, those students performed significantly better than their peers, academically, socially, emotionally. Not because they had more ability, but because they were treated as if they did. This is the Pygmalion Effect. When someone expects more from you, you unconsciously begin to rise to meet it. It's subtle, invisible. The teacher asks a few more questions, offers more encouragement, gives slightly more time to respond. The student, sensing this belief, becomes more engaged, and the loop continues. A belief becomes a behavior becomes an outcome. And the outcome proves the belief, even though it began as fiction. Now flip it. The Golem effect is the inverse. Low expectations produce poorer outcomes. We often internalize how others see us, even when they never say it out loud, the sigh before someone speaks. The way they explain something just a little too slowly, the absence of follow-up. It's a quiet erosion. And over time, it teaches us to shrink inside the story they've written. This doesn't just apply to schools or offices. It plays out in families, in friendships, in relationships where one person subtly believes the other will never change, and so they don't. It's not that belief magically transforms people. It's that we respond to the environments our expectations create. Belief isn't passive. It shapes tone. It influences what we notice, what we praise, what we forgive, and that in turn shapes behavior. So what can we do with this? First, reflect. Who in your life expects you to fail, even silently? Who sees your potential even when you don't? And more importantly, what expectations are you placing on others? Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can give someone is the chance to rise, not by pushing them, but by believing out loud. I know this isn't easy, but I've seen you handle harder. You're the kind of person who figures things out. I trust your judgment here. These aren't compliments. They're mirrors, showing people a version of themselves they forgot was there. The Pygmalion effect isn't magic, it's attention applied with hope. And the quiet truth is this: the stories we tell about people, even silently, are the stories they often begin to live. So choose your story well. Speak it, show it, and stay long enough to watch someone grow into it, not because they were already extraordinary, but because you made space for that possibility to become real. Tell them a story. You have a message to share, an idea, a lesson, a pitch, a truth. You think, if I just give people the facts, they'll get it. So you make your case, you list the reasons, you explain the logic, but they look at you blankly, unmoved, unchanged. And then someone else walks into the room. They say fewer words, but they say them as a story. And suddenly, everyone leans in. Why? Because the human brain doesn't run on facts. It runs on meaning, and meaning lives inside stories. Cognitive psychologists have shown that we remember information 22 times better when it's wrapped in a narrative than when it's presented as bullet points. Why? Because a story activates more areas of the brain, not just the language centers, but the sensory cortex, motor systems, and emotional regions too. When you hear he dropped the ball, your language center processes it. But when you hear his fingers slipped, the ball left his hands, and everyone held their breath, your brain starts simulating the experience. You're no longer just understanding, you're feeling. Stories are ancient tech. They're how we passed down knowledge before there was writing. How we warned of danger, taught values, explained the stars. They help us compress complexity into something the mind can hold. A statistic fades. A story lingers. But here's the deeper truth. People resist being told what to believe. But they lean into stories because they're not prescriptions, they're invitations. Instead of saying, "Here's what you should do," a story says, "Here's what someone did. What do you see in it?" And the audience fills in the space with their own mind, which means the idea isn't just given, it's co-created. That's what makes it stick. This isn't about becoming a novelist. It's about knowing that every message, no matter how small, becomes stronger when it walks in wearing human skin. If you're a manager, don't just say, "We need to move faster." Tell the story of when you waited too long and what it cost. If you're a teacher, don't just say curiosity matters. Tell how a question you asked as a kid changed everything later. If you're a parent, don't just say be careful. Tell the story of the mistake you made, the one you still remember decades later. Even a single moment, a one-sentence scene, a flicker of emotional detail can turn information into impact. Because we don't just learn through data, we learn through witnessing. We follow characters. We feel risk. We wonder what's next. And in doing so, we internalize the message, not as something told to us, but as something we lived through. So next time you want to teach, to influence, to connect, don't just make your point, tell us how it happened. Give us a reason to care, not just to understand. Wrap your idea in flesh and heartbeat. Let it breathe. Let it move. And trust that long after the lesson fades, the story will remain, still walking through their memory, still whispering, "This mattered." Smile with your eyes. You're in line at a coffee shop. The barista looks at you and says, "Hi, how can I help you?" Their voice is polite. Their mouth forms a smile. But something feels, you don't feel seen. You feel processed. Now rewind. Same barista. Same words. But this time, their eyes lift, soften just slightly. You catch the glint of something warm, even playful. And suddenly, you feel it. This isn't just customer service. It's a human moment. There's a word for this. It's called a Duchenne smile, a term from 19th century neurologist Guillaume Duchenne, who studied facial expressions and discovered that real smiles use different muscles than fake ones. A fake smile, the kind you force for a photo or a formal situation, only uses the muscles around the mouth, but a genuine smile? It activates the orbicularis oculi, the muscles around your eyes. That's why you can't fake it well. The eyes are the giveaway. In psychology, this matters more than it seems. Studies have shown that people perceive Duchenne smiles as more trustworthy, more attractive, more emotionally intelligent. In one experiment, participants were shown photos of people smiling, some real, some fake. The ones who smiled with their eyes were consistently rated as more sincere and likable, even when the expressions were subtle. This plays out in interviews, in sales, in therapy, in dating. And most importantly, in everyday interactions that seem too small to matter, but actually carry the full weight of connection. Let's get specific. You're a manager giving feedback. You say, "I know this wasn't easy, and I really appreciate your effort." You might mean it, but if your eyes are flat, locked on your screen, or scanning your phone, the message doesn't land. But if you lift your gaze, soften your expression, and let the smile reach your eyes, the same sentence becomes a gesture of care. Or imagine this. You're meeting someone new. They're nervous. You lean in slightly. You make eye contact, not in an intense, interrogating way, but in that quiet, present way. Your mouth might barely move. But your eyes say, "You're safe here." That's not charisma. That's attunement. You don't need to be overly expressive. You don't need to plaster a big grin on your face 24/7. It's not about performance. It's about alignment. When your facial expression matches your internal emotion, even just a little, people feel that resonance. And because humans are wired for social decoding, they respond in kind. Your micro-expression becomes contagious. You've probably felt this before, when someone greets you with a mechanical hey versus one, where their face actually lights up for a second. When someone says thank you but avoids your gaze, versus when their whole expression reflects sincerity. When someone smiles in a photo versus when someone smiles after they've just heard something that truly delights them. The difference is tiny, but it's also everything. So how do you practice this? It starts with presence. You can't smile with your eyes if your mind is elsewhere. Take one breath before greeting someone. Make space for a half-second of attention. Look at the person, not just through them. And let your face, especially your eyes, reflect that you're actually here. A smile from the mouth can check a box. But a smile from the eyes opens a door. Not because you're trying to impress, but because you've allowed a moment of genuine connection to escape your head and reach the world. In an age of auto-replies, tired faces, and half-present conversations, a real smile, even a small one, might be the only human signal someone gets all day. Let it count. Reframe I have to I get to. You wake up, you look at the clock. The to-do list rushes in before your feet touch the ground. I have to get ready. I have to get the kids to school. I have to respond to those emails. I have to go to that meeting I don't even want to be in. You're not even fully awake, but already you're behind. Already carrying a sense of burden, of obligation. Two words drive that feeling. Have to. And while they seem harmless, they carry a psychological weight. They imply no choice, no freedom, no joy, just duty. But what happens if you change just one word? I get to respond to those emails. I get to make breakfast. I get to work out. I get to go to that meeting. It sounds like a cheesy reframe at first. But it isn't. It's a shift in perspective that reshapes your relationship with your own life. Let's break it down. The phrase, I have to, activates a stress response, even subtly. It reinforces the idea that you're being forced, pulled by external demands. But when you say I get to, you reintroduce choice and gratitude. It reminds your brain that what you're doing isn't punishment, it's opportunity. I have to pick up my kid from practice becomes I get to be the kind of parent who's present. I have to finish this project becomes I get to work on something that challenges me and that someone is trusting me to do. I have to clean the house becomes I get to care for a space that shelters me. This doesn't mean you'll suddenly want to do everything. Of course not. Some tasks will always feel tedious or exhausting. But even then, this shift gives you a sliver of agency. Instead of dragging through the day like a prisoner of obligation, you begin to recognize that you're participating in something meaningful, even if it's small. And it's not just for chores or routines. This shift can soften big life moments too. A cancer survivor once said, I used to hate going for runs. Now after chemo, every time I run, I remind myself, I get to do this. A son caring for his aging father said, it's hard, but I remind myself, not everyone gets to spend these last months together. I do. I get to doesn't deny difficulty. It holds it while still honoring the privilege of being here for it. Even in work, this shift can be radical. Let's say you're burnt out. I have to lead this team. Feels crushing. But if you pause and think, I get to be the kind of leader I always wished I had, the task becomes personal, not just professional. You're not just surviving another day, you're shaping it with intent. So here's the practice. Every time you catch yourself saying, I have to, pause. Repeat the sentence in your mind, replacing it with, I get to. Then see what changes, not just in how you think, but in how you feel. And if it feels fake at first, that's okay. Sometimes your brain just needs a few tries before it realizes you're not a prisoner of your day. You're the one walking through it. One moment at a time, one choice at a time, You don't have to reframe anything, but you get to if you want. The default bias. You're signing up for a new app. You're given 3 settings to choose from, but one is already selected by default. You pause for a second, consider changing it, but leave it alone. It's just easier that way. Later, you're invited to join a retirement plan at work. You get the email, but you're busy, and since it says you'll be enrolled automatically unless you opt out, you shrug and move on. Months pass. You never change a thing. You don't remember choosing, but the choice is made. This is the power of the default bias, our tendency to stick with the option that's pre-selected, even when better alternatives exist. It's not laziness, it's how the brain conserves energy. Every decision, no matter how small, burns a little bit of cognitive fuel. So we look for shortcuts, and defaults feel safe, familiar, socially approved. Someone picked this already, so it must be fine. But that one quiet assumption shapes more of your life than you might think. Consider this. In countries like Austria, where people are automatically registered as organ donors unless they opt out, the donor rates are over 90%. In countries like Germany or the US, where people have to opt in, the rates drop below 20%. Same population, same beliefs, different default. Or look at software settings. Most people never change their privacy options, notification rules, or security preferences. Not because they agree with them, but because defaults feel like the path of least resistance. Even in relationships, we see this. You keep texting someone back because they always initiate, even though you're not interested. You keep saying yes to weekend plans with the same group, not because you enjoy it anymore, but because that's just what happens. Without realizing it, your life fills with choices you didn't really choose. But here's where it gets more personal. The most dangerous defaults aren't in software or forms. They're in your own mind. The automatic beliefs, the old habits, the "this is just how I am" narratives you've never paused to question. You assume you're bad with money because that's how you've always seen yourself. You don't speak up in meetings because you never have, and now it feels like that's just your personality. You stay in a job that drains you because changing paths sounds overwhelming, and anyway, this is the responsible thing to do. But responsible to who? To what? To the default. Here's the truth. Not choosing is still a choice. And every default you leave untouched quietly writes part of your story, sometimes for years. But this isn't a call to overhaul everything. It's a nudge to wake up one layer deeper, to start noticing. Next time you click agree, pause. Next time you say yes, ask yourself if you meant it. Next time you find yourself in a routine, check if it still serves you, not out of fear, but out of respect for your time, your energy, your actual values. You don't have to rewrite your whole life. You just have to remember, every default was designed by someone, and it's okay if you decide it doesn't fit you anymore. Because the life you build on purpose, even if slower, even if imperfect, will always feel more like yours than the one you sleepwalked into by default. Ask for help publicly. Why visibility changes the psychology of support. You're stuck on a problem. Maybe it's a work task, a life dilemma, or a creative block. You've spent hours, maybe days, turning it over in your mind. And eventually you think, I should probably ask for help, but you hesitate. You could message someone privately, quietly, safely, no spotlight, no risk, or you could ask in a public space, a group chat, a forum, a meeting where others can see that you're stuck, or confused, or unsure. And suddenly, a quiet resistance rises inside, because asking publicly comes with something more than just exposure. It comes with vulnerability, and that makes it powerful. Here's the psychology behind it. When you ask for help in private, the exchange is transactional. One person helps. You thank them. It ends. But when you ask in public, something else happens. More people feel invited to contribute. The social context shifts. It's no longer just about the problem, but about participation. You create visibility, and visibility builds trust. Let's say you're stuck on a technical issue. You post your question in a team Slack channel or on a forum like Stack Overflow. At first, it might feel uncomfortable. What if it's a stupid question? What if no one answers? But what actually happens, more often than not, is this. Someone who's been quiet suddenly jumps in with a solution. Others chime in to say they've had the same issue. Your vulnerability becomes a doorway for other people to show up. And now, instead of a one-on-one exchange, you've created a shared knowledge moment. Everyone gets better because you asked out loud. In corporate psychology, this is linked to something called collective efficacy. It's the idea that when people see others seeking help, learning openly, or admitting mistakes, they feel more psychologically safe to do the same. It's why smart leaders ask dumb questions in meetings. Why teachers pause to say, "I don't know. Let's find out." Why high-performing teams have members who aren't afraid to say, "I'm stuck." Because public help-seeking doesn't make you look weak. It makes courage visible, and that permission spreads. This also works in personal life. You're struggling with burnout. You mention it in a group chat. Someone responds privately, "Thank you for saying that. I've been feeling the same." You're trying to learn a skill. You post your messy progress online. People begin offering advice, encouragement, even their own stories. You didn't just get help. You created a space where it became normal to ask for it. That's leadership, even if it doesn't look like it. And yes, there's a risk. People might judge. You might not get the answer right away. You might feel exposed, but that exposure is often the cost of belonging. Not because you performed, but because you invited others to meet you where you really are. So the next time you're tempted to struggle in silence, ask yourself, what if the real courage isn't solving the problem alone, but modeling the willingness to ask out loud? Because when you do, you're not just helping yourself, you're helping others remember that they're not the only ones figuring it out as they go. Repetition belief. I'm not good at math. I'll never be a morning person. I just attract the wrong people. Say something once, and it's a passing thought. Say it 10 times, and it starts to feel like a truth. Hear it 100 times, and it becomes reality. Not because it's accurate, but because it's familiar. This is called the illusory truth effect, a psychological phenomenon where the more often we hear something, the more likely we are to believe it's true. And it doesn't matter if the information is false, biased, or even absurd. If it's repeated enough, it becomes sticky. Not because your brain agrees with it, but because your brain starts to say, "This sounds familiar, so it must be right." This is how propaganda works. It's how slogans burrow into our memory. It's why political ads repeat the same phrases again and again. But this doesn't just happen on global stages. It happens quietly in the conversations you overhear, in the content you scroll past, in the stories you tell yourself and hear from others without even noticing. For example, a student tells themselves over and over, "I'm just not creative." Eventually, they stop trying to paint, write, or explore ideas. A partner hears the phrase, "You're too sensitive enough times," and they start to distrust their own emotions. A child grows up in a household that constantly repeats, "We're just not lucky people." And so, even when opportunity knocks, they hesitate to open the door. None of these are facts, but repetition gives them the illusion of certainty. This is why marketers use mantras, why religious chants and affirmations exist, why we remember jingles from decades ago, but forget what we had for lunch last week. Your brain was never built to track truth perfectly. It evolved to detect patterns and to treat familiarity as a proxy for safety. So when something is repeated, even gently, even passively, your cognitive defenses start to lower. You stop questioning. You start accepting. And slowly, it becomes your version of reality. But here's the liberating part. This mechanism works in both directions. If harmful repetition can plant lies, then intentional repetition can reinforce truth. If you've heard "you're not enough" 100 times, you can begin saying "I'm learning, I'm trying, and I'm not giving up" 200 times. No, it won't feel real at first, but neither did the lie the first time you heard it. This is why therapy often involves saying things out loud. Why mantras, journaling, and affirmations, when used with intention, do have power. Not because they change the world around you, but because they begin to rewire the internal script you've unknowingly repeated for years. So pay attention to what you hear, to what you say, to what you let echo in the background of your day. Because belief doesn't always begin with conviction. Sometimes it begins with repetition. And if you must repeat something, make it something that pulls you toward life, not away from it. Let them win the small battles. You're in a meeting. Someone pushes back against your idea, not because it's wrong, but because they want to be right. You feel the reflex rise in your chest. Defend, clarify, prove your point. You know you're correct. You have evidence, logic, charts, even. But you also see something else. The other person's ego standing at attention. So now you're not arguing about facts. You're arguing about identity. And in that moment, you have a choice. Win the argument or win the relationship. This is the art of strategic surrender, learning when to let someone else win the small battle so you can build long-term trust, credibility, or influence. It sounds counterintuitive, especially in a culture that equates success with being right, being loud, being dominant. But the most effective communicators, leaders, negotiators, even parents understand something deeper. You don't need to fight every fire to light a path forward. Here's a real-world example. Imagine a manager introducing a new process. One team member resists. They think it's inefficient. They argue during the rollout. The manager could shut it down fast. "Here's why I'm right. Get on board." But instead she pauses and says, "You know what? Let's try your way for the next week on a small task and compare results." Now two things happen. The team member feels heard, which reduces their resistance. The manager builds credibility by showing flexibility, not control. Even if the original idea gets reinstated later, the person now feels included, not bulldozed. That small win they were given. It paid off in loyalty. This plays out in relationships, too. You and your partner disagree on how to arrange the kitchen. You think the plates should go near the sink. They insist they belong in the cabinet above the stove. You could argue your logic. Or you could say, "Sure, let's try your setup for a week. We'll see how it feels." In doing so, you give them a small win. And now, they're more likely to listen the next time you ask for a change. Because influence doesn't come from overpowering, it comes from being generous with power. Letting others win the small battles tells them, "I value your input. We don't need to agree on everything for this to work. You're not under threat." It lowers defenses. It shifts the dynamic from competition to collaboration. But here's the key. You're not giving in because you're weak. You're choosing your battles because you're strong enough to play the long game. Not every correction needs to be made. Not every hill is worth dying on, and when you pick your moments with intention, your voice actually carries more weight when it truly matters. Think of any skilled leader you admire. They don't just bark orders or shut down disagreement. They know when to listen, when to yield, and when to let others be right, even if only for a moment. Because leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about creating a room where everyone feels smart enough to contribute. So next time you feel the urge to correct, to win, to make your point heard, ask yourself, is this a hill to die on or a bridge to build on? Sometimes the strongest move in the room is the one where you quietly step back and let someone else stand tall for a moment. Not because they're right, but because the relationship is more important than the scoreboard. Use contrast to reveal value. You sip a glass of cold water. It's refreshing. but unremarkable. Then someone hands you a chili pepper. You bite it. Your mouth burns. You reach again for the same glass of water. And now, it feels like salvation. Same water, different context. This is the power of contrast. Our brains don't measure things in absolutes. We measure in comparison. How good something feels, how expensive it seems, how attractive it looks, depends almost entirely on what came right before it. We evaluate difference, not essence. This shows up everywhere in daily life. A $70 shirt feels expensive until you're shown the $300 one first. A quiet coworker seems passive until they follow a manager who micromanages every breath. A 3-star hotel feels underwhelming until you've spent 3 nights sleeping in your car. The same object, experience, or decision can shift in perceived value just by changing what it's sitting next to. Marketers know this well. It's why infomercials always start by showing you a frustrating version of the problem. Tired of tangled cords, sick of burnt toast, struggling to keep your spices organized. Then they unveil the product, not in a vacuum, but as a relief from contrast. Even prices are structured this way. Ever notice how stores show you the deluxe option first? That $999 mattress suddenly makes the $499 one seem reasonable, even affordable, but if you had only seen the $499 first, you might have walked away. But this isn't just about sales. It applies to persuasion, gratitude, and mindset. Let's take persuasion. Imagine you want to convince a friend to try a new diet. Instead of saying, "It's only vegetables," you might contrast it with something worse. "Hey, it's not a juice fast. You're not starving. You'll still eat 3 meals a day." Suddenly, it feels easier. We don't just compare things to what they are. We compare them to what they could have been. Now consider gratitude. You wake up late. It's raining. Your plans fall through. It feels like a bad day. But then you remember a year ago, you were unemployed. You were going through heartbreak. You were in pain. You look at today again. It's still messy, but now it feels bearable. Even good. Not because the facts changed, but because contrast reminded you of the full picture. And this perhaps is where contrast becomes most powerful, not as a trick, but as a tool for perspective. Think of moments when you finally saw the value of something. The sound of silence after a loud city, the warmth of a home after a week on the road. The kindness of a stranger after being ignored all day. Those moments weren't created out of nowhere. They were revealed by what came before them. So how can you use contrast intentionally? When presenting a new idea, frame it next to a worse alternative so the strengths pop. When building appreciation, reflect on what was missing before. When struggling with perspective, shift the backdrop, even briefly. It's not about manipulation. It's about choosing which lens brings the truth into focus. Sometimes we wait for life to show us value. But often value was there all along. We just hadn't seen it in contrast to what we've known. And once we do, the ordinary becomes precious. The background becomes art. The quiet becomes music. Not because anything changed, but because now you're finally looking at it in the right light. Mirror neurons, why emotions are contagious, and what that means for you. You're in a room where someone yawns, and you feel the urge to yawn too. You're watching a movie, and even though it's fiction, your eyes fill with tears during a quiet scene. You walk into a space where someone is tense, and without a word, your own shoulders tighten. Why? Because the human brain doesn't just observe, it mirrors. And that mirroring is so subtle, so automatic, that most of us don't realize we're doing it every second we're around others. This is the power of mirror neurons, specialized cells in the brain that fire not only when you perform an action, but also when you observe someone else doing it. Discovered in the 1990s by a team of Italian neuroscientists studying monkeys, these neurons helped explain something deeply human, how we feel others, not just understand them. It's what makes empathy possible, not as an abstract idea, but as a felt, physical experience. When you see someone stub their toe, you flinch because your brain partially simulates that pain. When you hear someone speak with nervousness, you may feel your own heart race slightly. When you watch someone smile genuinely, your face muscles begin to mirror the shape, and you might even feel better. Emotion, it turns out, is not contained. It's shared, transmitted, infectious, in the most invisible way. This has profound implications for daily life. You are constantly both a receiver and a transmitter of emotional states. The way you walk into a room doesn't just reflect how you feel, it alters how others feel too. If you're calm, others feel grounded. If you're agitated, tension spreads. If you're curious, openness grows. You don't have to say anything. Your presence is already communicating. Now consider this. What happens when you spend time around someone who's constantly cynical? What shifts in you when you work in an environment full of unspoken stress? Why do certain people leave you feeling lighter, even if the conversation was about something serious? We often think emotions are internal, private, controlled, chosen. But mirror neurons remind us who you're around becomes part of who you are. And likewise, who you are becomes part of everyone around you. So what do you do with that knowledge? You begin to take emotional responsibility, not just for your own state, but for the ripple you send out. This doesn't mean faking positivity or suppressing struggle. It means becoming aware of your signal. It means recognizing that when you take a deep breath before reacting, you're not just calming yourself, you're giving others permission to breathe too. It means that when you listen with presence, you invite someone else to feel seen. And when you hold space for your own emotions, without shame or rush, you model the kind of inner steadiness that others can mirror back. We're more connected than we like to admit, more porous, more easily shaped by the tone of the people we allow near us. But that's not just a vulnerability. It's also a kind of power, because if emotion flows both ways, then your calm can be a lighthouse. Your joy can be a fuse. Your groundedness can hold a room together in silence. No spotlight, no performance. Just presence, transmitted neuron to neuron, without permission, without even trying. The reverse apology. Thank instead of sorry. You're late to a meeting. You rush in flustered and say, "Sorry, I'm late." It's polite. It's automatic. It's what we've been trained to say. But here's the twist. That small phrase does something subtle. It makes the moment about your failure, and worse, it can make the other person feel like they need to reassure you. It's okay. Don't worry about it. You're fine. You've unintentionally asked for emotional labor to ease your guilt. Now imagine this instead. You walk in, take a breath, make eye contact, and say, "Thanks for waiting." Suddenly, the moment shifts. No one's defending. No one's managing your feelings. You've just acknowledged them with gratitude, and it feels respectful, not needy. This is the reverse apology. It's not about being less polite. It's about being more effective. We often say sorry for things that don't require an apology. Sorry for asking a question. Sorry for taking up space. Sorry for speaking. Each time we chip away at our confidence and make others responsible for holding it up. But when you replace sorry with thank you, you do two powerful things. You shift from guilt to gratitude. You uplift the other person instead of diminishing yourself. It works in all kinds of moments. Instead of, "Sorry for the delay," say, "Thanks for your patience." Instead of, "Sorry I talk so much," say, "Thanks for listening." Instead of, "Sorry to bother you," say, "Thanks for making time." Same situation. Totally different energy. Why does this work? Because gratitude builds rapport. It invites connection instead of repair. And most importantly, it keeps your identity intact. You're not casting yourself as the one who messed up. You're casting others as people worth appreciating. It's a subtle signal. I trust that we're good, and I respect your role in this moment. And people notice that. They feel it. Of course, real apologies matter. When you've truly hurt someone, own it. Say sorry and mean it. But don't confuse minor moments of friction with deep wrongs. Not everything needs an apology. Some things just need acknowledgement. And gratitude goes farther. Try it for one day. Catch every reflexive sorry before it escapes. Replace it with a simple thank you. Not only will you feel more confident, the people around you will feel more appreciated. That tiny switch. It changes more than just a sentence. It shifts the entire tone of your presence. The even-if technique. You're pitching an idea. Maybe it's a new product. Maybe it's a trip, a favor, or a point of view. And right as you finish, you see it in their eyes, that flicker of hesitation, that invisible wall of doubt forming before they even speak. They're already thinking, yeah, but what if it doesn't work? That might be good for others, but not for me. Sounds risky. You haven't even finished, and the resistance is already alive. This is where the even-if technique changes everything. Instead of waiting for objections to surface and then battling them, you name them first. But not just to acknowledge, to neutralize them. Even if you've tried something like this before and it didn't work, even if you're not sure you can stick with it, even if this feels like a big step right now, each time you say, even if you're doing two powerful things, you're telling them, I see the worry you're not saying out loud. And more importantly, it doesn't have to stop you. This works because of psychological reactance, the resistance we feel when someone tries to push us into a decision. But when you disarm the fear before it fully forms, you remove the pressure, you let them breathe. You make the choice feel safer. And ironically, that's when people lean in. This isn't just for persuasion. It's for any moment where someone might hesitate, want your team to take on a stretch project. Even if it's outside our comfort zone, we've solved bigger problems before. Encouraging a friend to join a social event? Even if you're feeling off tonight, you don't have to stay long, just show up. Giving someone a new tool or approach? Even if this feels awkward at first, you'll pick it up faster than you think. See the pattern. You're acknowledging the fear without empowering it. Here's why it's so effective. People are afraid of being wrong, of failing, of being the exception to what works. When you say even if, you're telling them you're still included, even with your doubts, even with your flaws, even with your hesitation. That's empathy, disguised as persuasion. But it only works when it's honest. Don't fake it. Don't say even if just to manipulate. People sense that. Use it to shine light into the corners of someone's thinking. Let them feel seen. Let their objections feel safe enough to shrink. Because when you walk into someone's doubt with them, you're no longer a threat. You're a guide. And suddenly, the thing that felt risky, it starts to feel possible, even if it didn't before. The invisible setup, make it their idea. Have you ever suggested something to someone and they pushed back, even though it was obviously the right thing? You might have thought, why are they resisting this? It's clearly a good idea, but here's the secret most people miss. Humans don't just want good ideas, we want ownership. We're far more likely to act on something if we feel like it came from us. And that's where the invisible setup comes in, the art of guiding someone to the right idea without ever telling them what it is. Imagine you're working with a colleague who's hesitant about changing a process. You could say, we need to change this. The old system isn't working, and you'll likely face resistance. Or, you could ask, have you noticed the team's been running into delays lately? What do you think might be causing that? Suddenly, the door opens. They start thinking about the problem. And if you ask the right follow-ups, they may suggest the very thing you wanted to propose. And when they do, they're not just accepting the idea, they're defending it. This technique isn't manipulation. It's respect in action. You're not forcing your idea onto someone. You're creating space for them to arrive at it on their own terms. And when they do, they'll feel smarter, more confident, more committed, because it's their idea now. It works in all kinds of situations. Want your child to clean their room? Ask, how do you feel when your space is really clear and open? Let them describe it. Then gently say, what would make that feeling happen today? Convincing a team to adopt a new tool? Ask, what's slowing us down the most right now? When they say switching tabs all day, you say, what if there was a way to keep it all in one place? Trying to help a friend break a habit. Ask, when was the last time you felt really proud of how you handled that situation? Let the memory guide the behavior. The key is curiosity, not instruction. Let questions do the work of persuasion, because people resist being told what to do, but they rarely resist their own conclusions. This is how therapists work, how great negotiators operate, how wise teachers teach. They lead you just far enough so that you walk the rest of the way yourself. And in doing so, you take the idea more seriously. You carry it further. You defend it harder because it's no longer their idea. It's yours. The "you were right" effect. Use ego to repair trust. There's a phrase so simple, so disarming, it can melt tension in seconds. It's not an apology. It's not flattery. It's this: you were right. Now think of the last time someone told you that. Not sarcastically, sincerely. Didn't it feel good? Not just because your opinion was validated, but because someone remembered it, because someone admitted it. And if they had previously disagreed with you, even subtly, that little phrase had weight. It repaired trust. This is the "you were right" effect. When used authentically, it taps into one of the deepest drivers of human behavior, the desire to be seen as competent. People want to feel that their perspective matters, that they saw something others didn't, that their voice carries meaning. And when you say, "you were right," you hand them that recognition, with no strings attached. Here's the psychology behind it. Most disagreements, even small ones, leave emotional residue. Even when the issue fades, ego lingers. They didn't get what I was trying to say. I told them that was going to happen. They didn't listen. This builds quiet resentment. Not always loud, not always spoken, but real. And often, all it takes to dissolve it is a simple, clear acknowledgement. You were right about that deadline. You were right. We should have prepared more. You were right to be cautious. It's not defeat. It's maturity. It shows that you can hold space for someone else's perspective without diminishing your own. This is especially powerful in work relationships, where tensions build over competing ideas, friendships, where pride can block honesty, parenting, where being the adult sometimes drowns out listening, romantic relationships, where old wounds often need the balm of recognition more than the bandage of explanation. It's one of the fastest ways to rebuild damaged rapport, not by explaining yourself, but by elevating them. And here's the twist. You don't even have to agree 100%. You can say, "You were right about that part. I didn't see it then." You're not surrendering your view. You're sharing the truth of their accuracy and doing it gracefully. That's a rare skill. So the next time you feel tension between you and someone else, think back. Was there a moment when their warning, their instinct, their idea turned out to have some truth? If so, tell them. Not dramatically. Not as a gesture, just plainly. You were right. Those 3 words might do what 20 more couldn't. Rebuild respect, ease resentment, and quietly say, "I see you now." The write it, don't say it approach. Some conversations are hard to have face to face. Even with the best intentions, our words can land wrong. Tone gets misread, defenses rise, and suddenly, a simple point turns into a battlefield. But there's another way, a quieter, gentler, more strategic path. Write it. Don't say it. This isn't about being passive-aggressive. It's about understanding how people process emotionally loaded information. When we speak, especially in tense moments, emotions ride shotgun. We interrupt. We hear what we fear, not what's said. We react instead of reflect. But when you write instead of speak, something changes. You give the other person time to read, to pause, to come back to it later. Let's say you need to give feedback to a teammate who's not pulling their weight. Saying it aloud might trigger a flood of excuses or defensiveness. But a carefully worded message gives you control of tone, clarity, and timing. Hey, I wanted to share something I've noticed. I know you've had a lot on your plate, and I appreciate your effort, but there's been a pattern of delays lately that's affecting the rest of the team. Can we talk about how we might handle it better going forward? It's calm, measured, not a script for conflict, but a space for conversation. This works even better in personal relationships. When emotions are high, when you're hurt, frustrated, or afraid you'll say too much, writing becomes a safety valve. You can say, I need a little time to gather my thoughts. Can I write you instead of talking? That one move shows maturity. You're not avoiding. You're choosing clarity over chaos. Writing also lets you see your thoughts more clearly. When we speak, we improvise. When we write, we reflect. You might even discover that what you thought you needed to say wasn't the real issue at all. Writing forces you to slow down. And in that slowness, wisdom appears. Here's where it shines. Difficult feedback reduces emotional spikes, lets the other person digest. Confessions or apologies give space for honesty without escalation. Long-distance communication keeps the connection thoughtful and intentional. Team dynamics avoids performative calling out, replaces it with private clarity. And here's a hidden bonus. Written words create recorded understanding. People can revisit what you said, not what they remembered emotionally. Of course, not everything should be written. Some conversations demand your voice, your face, your presence. But when the stakes are high and the emotions are raw, writing gives your message a better chance of landing. So next time you feel the tension rising, ask yourself, would this land better on the page than in the air? And if the answer is yes, then take a breath and write. Ask before you advise. You're talking to a friend who's venting. They're overwhelmed, frustrated, spilling it all out. And you, with the best of intentions, step in and say, you know what you should do. Silence. Their expression shifts. They nod politely, but something in them pulls back. You were trying to help, but they weren't ready. This is the mistake we all make, and it comes from a good place. We want to be useful. We want to fix. But what people want first is permission. Here's the technique. Before offering advice, feedback, or insight, simply ask, would you like a thought on that? Do you want my opinion, or just someone to listen right now? Mind if I offer an idea? This tiny pause, this moment of asking before advising, changes everything. Why? Because it respects psychological autonomy, the need every human has to feel in control of their own mind and decisions. When you ask first, three powerful things happen. You lower resistance. Advice that's invited feels collaborative, not corrective. You raise trust. People feel safe when they're not being rushed or judged. You gauge emotional readiness. Sometimes people don't need a solution, they just need a witness. Let's flip the roles. Think of a time when you were overwhelmed, and someone, maybe your partner or boss or friend, jumped in with, here's what you need to do. Even if they were right, didn't it kind of annoy you? Now imagine instead they said, want me to just listen, or are you open to some input? Suddenly, the pressure's gone. You get to choose. You feel respected, not managed, and because of that, you're more likely to actually hear what they say. This is especially powerful in leadership. I've got a few thoughts. Want to explore them now or later? Parenting. Want help with this? Or are you figuring it out on your own today? Friendships and relationships. Do you want support or someone to vent to for a sec? In each case, you're doing more than asking a question. You're sending a message. I trust your ability to decide what you need. Here's the paradox. When you ask to give advice, you're more likely to be welcomed. When you push to give advice, you're more likely to be rejected. Permission builds power because it's rooted in empathy, not ego. And that small pause before you speak, that's the space where connection lives. So next time you feel the urge to jump in, don't pause. Make space. Ask, would you like a suggestion? Because advice offered without permission is often ignored. But advice offered with care, it can land softly and stay. The future snapshot trick. Let's do something strange. Close your eyes, unless you're driving, and imagine this. It's a random Tuesday. You wake up in a room that feels like yours, not the one you're in now. Cleaner, lighter, the coffee is already brewing, and there's no rush. No fire to put out, just calm. Feels good, doesn't it? That moment, that crystal clear mental image, is what psychologists call a future snapshot. And it's one of the most powerful, underused tools in the human playbook. Because your brain is terrible at caring about the future. Not abstractly. We all say we care, but on a chemical level, it doesn't register. It's blurry, unfelt, unreal. That's why you procrastinate. That's why you eat the cookie instead of saving for retirement. That's why tomorrow never starts today. But here's the hack. The brain may not respond to time, but it does respond to stories. And even better, to scenes. You don't need a lecture. You need a movie trailer of your own life, just one frame of a life you'd actually want to live. And when that snapshot is vivid enough, it changes behavior. Let's say someone wants to quit smoking. Telling them it's bad for your lungs is correct and completely ineffective. Now try this. Picture this. You're hiking up a steep trail 5 months from now, and for the first time, you're not out of breath. You're not coughing. You're laughing. That's not information. That's motivation. Same goes for relationships, careers, goals. If someone's afraid to take a leap, don't push them. Ask. Let's say you did it. 1 year from now. What does your day look like? If they can picture it, they can reach for it. If they can't picture it, they'll stay where it's safe and stuck. Now, the trick is in the details. Bad future snapshots sound like, imagine success. Too vague, too flat. Good ones are sensory, grounded, lived in. What's on the table? What time of day is it? Who's next to you? What are you wearing? What's the first thing you do when you wake up? Because when the future feels real, your brain starts working backwards to get you there. And yes, this works on yourself too. Next time you feel unmotivated, don't give yourself a pep talk. Give yourself a scene, something you can see. Something your nervous system recognizes as safe, possible, and worth moving toward. We talk so much about visualization like it's some mystical technique. But it's not magic. It's memory, just written in advance. And sometimes, that's all it takes to shift the course of a day or a life. The second-hand criticism trick. Let's be honest. Giving criticism is one of the hardest things we do. No one wants to be the bad guy. And if you've ever tried to give someone honest feedback, you know the feeling. Tight throat. Careful phrasing. Worry in your chest. Because even when you mean well, people don't always hear what you're trying to say. They hear judgment. They hear attack. They hear, you're not good enough. But what if you could say what needs to be said without triggering their defenses? That's where the second-hand criticism trick comes in. A subtle shift in how you deliver a hard truth without making it feel like a direct hit. Here's the move. Instead of saying, you're coming off a bit cold in meetings, you say, some people have mentioned they weren't sure how to read your tone in meetings. I figured you'd want to know. It's no longer me versus you. It's you, the messenger, delivering intel. You're not placing blame. You're passing along insight. And believe it or not, this lands better. Why? Because the ego isn't being directly poked. The spotlight shifts from confrontation to curiosity. Now they're wondering, who noticed that? Is that how I'm coming across? Their energy goes toward processing, not defending. Let's go deeper. This technique works because of a psychological principle called self-distancing. When we hear something indirectly, we engage in self-reflection instead of self-protection. We imagine the feedback as if we were hearing about someone else, and in that mental distance we find clarity. We're far more likely to believe and act on feedback when we feel we discovered it ourselves. Use this when you're managing someone and want to give honest critique without micromanaging. You're in a relationship and need to raise a sensitive habit or behavior. You're helping a friend who can't seem to see how they're showing up. It's not manipulation. It's framing, and it makes difficult conversations possible. Example, let's say a coworker tends to dominate conversations without noticing. Instead of, "You talk too much in meetings," try, "Hey, I heard someone mention they didn't feel there was space to speak up last time. It might be something we can tweak as a team." They'll reflect. They'll adjust, and they won't feel personally attacked. Now, this trick isn't about gossiping. You're not throwing others under the bus. You're not inventing stories. You're simply externalizing feedback in a way that the other person can hear it. And let's face it, what good is truth if no one can absorb it? So the next time you have something important and difficult to say, try not pointing the finger, try pointing to the mirror indirectly. Because sometimes people don't need to be told, they just need to overhear the version they're finally ready to believe. The name it to tame it effect. You've seen this before. A child in full meltdown mode, fists clenched, face red, screaming about something that makes zero sense to you. You try logic, you try distraction. Nothing works. Then a parent kneels down and says gently, "You're feeling really angry right now, huh?" And suddenly, it shifts. The storm softens. The child exhales. Not fixed, but heard. That's the power of this trick. Name it to tame it. And it doesn't just work on kids. It works on everyone, including you. Here's the core idea. When someone is flooded with emotion, frustration, fear, sadness, panic, trying to reason with them is like trying to hug a tornado. Words don't land. Logic doesn't stick. But if you can help them put words to the emotion, the brain starts to change. Literally, this isn't poetry. It's neuroscience. When you label an emotion, the amygdala, the part of the brain that handles fear and threat, starts to quiet down. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, the thinking, regulating part, lights up. In simple terms, labeling the feeling starts to lower its power. It's like turning the light on in a dark room. The monster doesn't disappear, but it stops being in charge. Let's go real world. A teammate is snappy and impatient during a call. You could say, "Relax. It's not a big deal. That'll make it worse." Instead, try, "You seem a little overwhelmed. Is something feeling off?" You're not accusing, you're observing. And more importantly, you're offering a mirror, not a challenge. In relationships, this is gold. Let's say your partner is quiet and withdrawn. You sense tension. Rather than poking at them with, "Why are you acting weird?" you can say, "You feel kind of distant tonight. Are you okay?" It invites them to check in instead of check out. Even when you're alone, this works. Next time you're spiraling, say it out loud or write it down. "I feel anxious. I feel ashamed. I feel stuck." You don't have to solve it. Just name it. The act of naming it creates space between you and the feeling. And in that space, you start to regain control. But here's the catch. Most people resist labeling emotions because it feels vulnerable. They think naming fear makes them weak. But the truth is the opposite. Naming the storm lets you navigate it. Ignoring it just lets it run the ship. So next time someone's spiraling, or you are, don't rush to fix. Don't distract. Don't debate. Just name what's real. "You seem frustrated. This feels disappointing. You're under a lot right now, huh?" No judgment, just presence, just truth. Because when we give a name to what hurts, we give ourselves a chance to heal it. Close the loop. You're halfway through a TV series. A character is about to reveal a secret, but the screen cuts to black. Next episode, you click. You can't help it. That urge to keep going. It's not weakness, it's psychology. You've just been caught in an open loop. The human brain is wired for closure. When a story is incomplete, a sentence is hanging, or a mystery is unresolved, our minds stay tethered, looping, waiting, checking back. This is known as the Zeigarnik Effect, our tendency to remember unfinished tasks or thoughts more vividly than completed ones. The waitress who remembers your complicated order until the moment you pay. The email you meant to respond to that keeps popping up in your head at midnight. The argument where you never got to say the last word. These are open loops, and they pull attention like gravity. Advertisers use this constantly. You'll never believe what happened next. What she said will shock you. The secret no one's talking about. They're not always offering value. They're offering incompletion, and we chase that closure instinctively. Not because we're weak, because we're human. But this doesn't just apply to media. It shows up in how we communicate, how we worry, and how we work. Think about this. An unresolved conversation haunts your mind for weeks. An idea you never acted on sits in the background like mental clutter. A decision you postponed shows up in dreams and daydreams alike. Open loops aren't always bad. They can drive creativity, keep us curious, fuel exploration, but too many at once? They fragment our focus. They drain mental energy. Each one whispering, "Finish me." So what can you do? 1. Notice where the loops are. Make a list. Emails left unsent. Projects started but never wrapped. Conversations hanging without closure. Promises to yourself still suspended. You don't have to finish them all right now. But naming them gives you power. 2 close small loops first. Answer that message. Schedule the appointment. Delete the draft you know you'll never send. Each small closure clears space. Each one makes you lighter. 3. Use open loops intentionally. Want to keep someone engaged? Start a story but delay the punchline. Pose a question before you offer the answer. This is why great teachers pause before key insights. Why cliffhangers work. Why good storytellers let silence hang for just a second longer. It's not manipulation, it's rhythm, and rhythm moves people. But the deeper power of closing loops is this. It brings peace. It's not just about productivity, it's about finally being able to rest your mind. When a chapter ends, when the thought is complete, when the apology is given, you exhale. Not because everything is perfect, but because the page has turned. So maybe today is not about doing more. Maybe it's about finishing one thing well. One task, one sentence. One moment that deserves a full stop, not a dangling ellipsis. Close the loop. And watch how quiet your mind becomes when it no longer has to keep circling.